Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Snoozy Scientist, where we wander gently through the mysteries of our world, one sleepy yawn at a time. Whether you're wrapped in a blanket, settling into the quiet after a long day, or floating in that soft space between waking and sleep, you're exactly where you need to be. Tonight, we're traveling back 70 million years to a time when South America stood alone, sealed off by oceans from the rest of the earth. Here, isolation became an artist, and nature began to experiment freely, sculpting creatures that seemed to test the very limits of life itself. And among them was a predator like no other. Its skull was short, yet crowned with horns sharp as stone. Its arms were so tiny they were almost invisible, yet its legs were long, powerful, and built for speed. A body made for motion, a design that defied logic. This is Carnotaurus sastrei, the meat-eating bull, a creature so strange, so precise, that it seemed built for a single purpose, to rule a world already beginning to die. When its bones were discovered in Patagonia in 1984, scientists stared at them in disbelief. It was as if evolution had played a practical joke, and yet every bone fit perfectly into place. This was no accident. This was nature at its most daring, creating perfection in the face of extinction. But how could something so specialized, so unlike anything before or after, rise to dominate its world, only to vanish forever into stone? Tonight, we'll walk quietly through its world, through heat and ash, through silence and wind, to uncover the story of a creature that shouldn't have existed, and yet somehow did. But before we begin, if you enjoy these quiet journeys into deep time, calm, curious, and filled with wonder, I'd love it if you gave this video a soft like and maybe tap subscribe. It helps more dreamers find their way to this peaceful little corner of science. And if you'd like, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? Now, take a deep breath, let your shoulders relax, and together, let's step softly into the story of the strangest predator that ever lived. Far to the south, where the continents were still finding their places in the world, there was once a land unlike any other. It was the late Cretaceous, 70 million years ago, and the earth was breathing in heat. Volcanoes drew lines of fire across the horizon, seas pulled back to reveal salt-scarred plains, and the air carried a weight of dust and thunder. Here, on the fragment of the old supercontinent, Gondwana, South America drifted in solitude. It was not the world we know today. The Andes were only whispers of stone on the edge of the land, still rising slowly from the crust of the earth. Great rivers wandered through open plains, threading between forests that flared with dry leaves and fell silent beneath ash. The seasons came harsh and irregular. Droughts stretched for years, then storms returned in violent waves, carving the ground into scars of clay and sand. This continent was a cradle for giants. In its isolation, nature had begun to experiment with boldness. Cut off from the northern world, evolution moved in its own rhythm. The great tyrannosaurs ruled the north, but here in the south, another dynasty had taken shape, one that would walk, hunt, and survive by very different rules. They were called the Abelisaurids, the southern dynasty of carnivores. They were not built like the northern predators, whose power came from crushing jaws and massive skulls. The Abelisaurids were sculpted for precision. Their skulls were short and tall, like living wedges of bone. Their faces were often ridged or horned, and their arms, strangely tiny, had almost disappeared into the body. Yet they were fast. Their legs were long and muscular, their tails deep and heavy like balancing masts. They moved with the sudden grace of creatures meant for ambush. From Madagascar to India and across the plains of South America, These predators had flourished. Their family included Abelisaurus, the ancestor whose name defined them all, and Majungasaurus, the island hunter from what would become Madagascar. But here, in the lands of Patagonia, the line reached its most daring expression. The horns sharpened, the body became lighter, the stride became longer. Nature seemed to be perfecting something, a form meant not only to kill, but to endure. The world that shaped them was one of contradiction. To the west, smoke and fire poured from volcanic fields that ran for hundreds of kilometers. The sky could shift from clear blue to blood red haze in an afternoon. To the east, broad stretches of open plains stretched toward inland seas where dust blew in endless waves. Trees grew low and tough, adapted to fire and heat. In some regions, ferns and cycads returned after each eruption, covering the land in green that never lasted long. Every creature that lived here carried the mark of survival in its bones. Herbivores grew thick hides and immense size. Titanosaurs, the long-necked giants of the south, wandered the plains in herds that shimmered like moving dunes. Their footsteps shaped the ground into shallow basins where water gathered after the rare rains. Smaller plant eaters followed them, searching for sprouts and shade. And where there were giants, the hunters waited. The abelisaurids ruled this uneasy kingdom. Their senses were tuned to motion, their muscles coiled for short, explosive bursts. They did not chase across long distances, for that would have been wasteful in such a dry world. Instead, they waited for the perfect instant, a moment of stillness between wind and heat, and then they struck. Every adaptation, from the narrowing of their skulls to the length of their limbs, whispered of this economy of motion. Isolation had made them specialists. The oceans around South America acted like walls, keeping new creatures from entering and old ones from leaving. Evolution here was not about competition with outsiders, but refinement within. Predators grew stranger, prey grew tougher, and each generation became more distinct from anything beyond the sea. The land itself seemed to encourage extremes. In some regions, lava flows hardened into sharp black ridges that glowed under the sun. In others, sheets of ash buried forests in gray silence. Yet life persisted. In every crack between the stones, roots took hold. In every temporary river, new forms emerged, reptiles, amphibians, and birds that found ways to survive on the edge of fire. This was the world Carnotaurus would inherit, a land where movement was everything, where the wind carried the scent of ash and survival meant balance, speed, and precision. It was a world that did not forgive mistakes, and so it rewarded the creatures that learned to master its rhythm. To walk through that landscape in imagination is to see colors of copper and bone, to hear the distant rumbles of earth shifting beneath its crust. The air would taste of minerals and dry grass. Across the open plains, the shadows of the giants moved slowly, framed by smoke drifting in narrow columns. Somewhere between those shadows, the abelisaurids waited, their bodies still and their eyes alert, blending into the low light. The continent itself seemed alive, restless, divided between creation and destruction. Mountains rose, rivers dried, forests burned and grew again. Each cycle etched itself into the bones of the creatures that lived there, giving them shapes that reflected endurance rather than comfort. And within that long, slow experiment, evolution prepared something remarkable. In this land of drought and flame, nature would sculpt a predator more refined than any before it, a creature so lean and swift that even time itself seemed to bend around its motion, a creature that would carry the last great heartbeat of Gondwana's age of giants. Before the fall of the dinosaurs, before the silence that would follow, this lost continent still thrummed with life, fierce, unyielding, and magnificent, and among its shadows, Carnotaurus waited, ready to step into the light. The wind that sweeps across Patagonia has a memory. It moves softly over the plains, whispering through dry grasses, carrying with it the scent of dust and time. For millions of years, it has shaped the same land where fire once flowed and giants once walked. And one day, in the quiet of 1984, that same wind brushed across a shape that should not have been there, a shape born of stone, bone, and the long patience of the earth. The discovery began with a small group of paleontologists led by Jose Bonaparte, a man whose life was devoted to giving voices back to the ancient and the silent. He and his team were exploring the Chubut province of Argentina, a region that had long been known for its fossils, though never for anything quite like what they were about to find. The ground there was layered in dry reds and pale yellows, the remains of ancient floodplains that had once carried life through the veins of a vanished continent. The dig began as many others do, with quiet labor under the sun, brushes, chisels, and patience. But as the dust lifted, shapes began to emerge that were more complete than anyone expected. A curve of bone here, a vertebra there, each one fitting together like the slow turning of a forgotten puzzle. At first, it seemed impossible. The bones were not scattered or broken as fossils so often are. They lay together in stillness, their alignment almost perfect, as though the creature had simply fallen, rested, and waited for the ages to pass. For paleontologists, this was a gift from deep time. What Jose Bonaparte and his team had uncovered was one of the most complete theropod skeletons ever found in the southern hemisphere. The more they uncovered, the stranger it became. The skull was unlike any they had seen before, tall, short, and ridged, with two sharp horns rising above the eyes. Its structure spoke of power, but also of something unusual, something that did not quite fit the familiar patterns of known predators. The arms were so small that they seemed to mock the idea of usefulness, mere stubs attached to a body built for speed and strength. The legs, on the other hand, were long and elegantly jointed, anchored to a deep and muscular tail. In the dust and heat of Patagonia, the skeleton slowly took shape beneath their hands. Bone by bone, it revealed its strange proportions, the forward lean of its spine, the narrowness of its hips, the sweep of its tail balanced like a spring. It was as if the creature had been designed for movement alone, a body stripped of excess, perfected by adaptation. And then came the most extraordinary surprise of all. Among the rock layers near the rib cage, faint impressions began to appear, patterns that were not bone at all, but texture. The paleontologist leaned closer, brushing away the stone as delicately as if it were glass. What emerged were the fossilized imprints of skin. In that moment, time seemed to fold. Millions of years dissolved, and the surface of a living animal reappeared in front of them. The skin was covered in a mosaic of small pebbly scales, interrupted by rows of larger conical bumps that ran along the sides like the traces of armor. Each pattern spoke of life, of the way sunlight might once have glinted across its body, of the touch of air that had last passed over it before the ash fell. Fossilized skin is among the rarest of discoveries. Bone endures, but flesh almost never does. To find both together in such remarkable preservation was nearly beyond belief. It gave science something it seldom receives, not just the structure of an animal, but its texture, its presence. For Jose Bonaparte and his team, the moment was overwhelming. The name they would give it came soon after, drawn from the Latin words for meat-eating bull, Carnotaurus sastrei, the bull-like predator of Patagonia. The name carried both the power and the strangeness of what they had unearthed. As word spread, scientists from around the world came to study the skeleton. Some marveled at its design, others puzzled over it. The short skull suggested a bite, unlike any known theropod, one made for quick, snapping strikes rather than crushing force. The arms were so small they raised questions no one could easily answer. Why would evolution shrink them to near disappearance? What purpose, if any, had they once served? At first glance, the fossil seemed to contradict itself, a sprinter with the body of an athlete, but the arms of a relic. Yet the longer it was studied, the clearer it became that every detail had meaning. The skull's deep muscle attachments hinted at a neck built for sudden motion. The legs showed adaptations for speed on open ground. The tail's construction revealed an anchor point for enormous muscles capable of explosive bursts. What had seemed absurd began to make sense. This was a predator sculpted not for power in the traditional sense, but for precision and velocity. Photographs of the fossil spread quickly through the paleontological community. To some, it looked almost mythic, as though a creature of imagination had stepped unexpectedly into the fossil record. But it was real, and it had left its entire form behind as proof. In time, replicas of the skeleton would appear in museums across the world. Visitors would stand beneath its skull and gaze up at the horns, trying to picture what it might have looked like alive, its skin glinting under a Cretaceous sun. Yet even in stone, there was something alive about it, a quiet tension in its posture, a suggestion that it might move again if the world just turned the right way. And so, in the dust of Patagonia, the Earth gave back one of its most extraordinary secrets, a predator whose design defied logic, a creature that once ran across the last great plains of Gondwana, leaving behind the print of its skin as a whisper to the future. The skull of Carnotaurus, resting quietly in its museum cradle, still carries the shadow of something fierce. Two horns curve forward from its brow, thick at the base and tapering to blunt, stony points. They are not long, not sharp like the lances of herbivores that defended their herds, but compact and heavy, built as though meant to strike or withstand force. Even in silence, they hold tension, the memory of motion. When scientists first examined them, the horns stirred both fascination and confusion. They seemed too small to serve as true weapons, yet too strong and deliberate to be mere decoration. They were tilted slightly forward, angled in a way that suggested purpose, though no one could say what that purpose might have been. The skull beneath them deepens the mystery. It is short and deep, like a wedge designed to push against resistance. The bones that support the horns are thickened, fused in places, giving the head an almost reinforced quality. Some paleontologists compared it to the front of a battering ram, built to take impacts from the side or front without splintering. Others saw in it the marks of display, the proud ornamentation of an animal whose strength was as much about communication as combat. Early theories split along those two paths, war or beauty. Some imagined Carnotaurus lowering its head to clash with rivals, the horns locking in the dust, like wrestlers testing their balance. Others saw the horns as bright and showy, perhaps covered in keratin that glistened in sunlight or changed color with age. If true, then they were not just weapons, but signals, as expressive as the feathers of a bird or the antlers of a stag. To understand what the horns were truly for, scientists began to look closer. The skull was scanned, measured, and modeled in 3 dimensions. Inside the bone, computer tomography revealed delicate networks of blood vessels, small channels branching like rivers beneath the surface. These channels suggested that living tissue once covered the horns and that this tissue may have been nourished by active blood flow. It was unlikely that such structure existed for protection alone. More likely, it was meant to support something visible, color, texture, perhaps even heat regulation during displays. The idea began to form that the horns were dual purpose, serving both social and functional roles. In life, they may have helped Carnotaurus communicate dominance without the need for constant violence. In many animals, strength is shown before it is proven. A tilt of the head, a posture, a shimmer of skin can resolve a contest long before bones meet. Still, the shape of the skull spoke of impact. Its construction bore signs of reinforcement in ways consistent with stress. In laboratory tests, researchers used digital simulations to model collisions between two Carnotaurus skulls. The results showed that the horns and the thickened bone beneath them could withstand side to side pressure far better than direct forward blows. This hinted that, rather than ramming straight on like bighorn sheep, Carnotaurus may have engaged in pushing matches, turning its head sideways, locking horns with another of its kind, and shoving in short, powerful bursts. Such behavior fits within patterns seen in modern animals. Crocodiles twist and push when wrestling for territory. Some birds strike sideways, using their beaks as levers. Even lizards and reptiles today display ritualized combat that emphasizes endurance over injury. Evolution tends to repeat strategies that work, adjusting the tools but keeping the dance. In this view, the horns were part of a performance written into the species itself, a ritual of strength and restraint. Perhaps during mating season, two males would meet under the heat of the Cretaceous sun, the air trembling with dust and low vibrations. They would circle, each assessing the other's size, then tilt their heads and push, muscles rippling beneath scaled skin. The collisions would be brief, rhythmic, controlled, power measured not by destruction, but by persistence. If this was true, then Carnotaurus's horns were not merely instruments of battle, they were part of a language. The scars and wear marks found on some skulls suggest repeated use, yet few show signs of breakage. The fights, if they could be called that, may have ended when one animal simply yielded and turned away, a contest resolved with grace, not chaos. The more scientists studied the fossil, the clearer the paradox became. The horns were both brutal and elegant, both signal and shield. Evolution had shaped them into something that blurred the line between weapon and art. They could have inspired fear or admiration, perhaps both at once. It is possible the horns served another role entirely, helping to anchor muscles or to regulate heat in the blazing Patagonian sun. In large reptiles and dinosaurs, blood flow through surface structures can act as a cooling system, carrying heat away from the body. If Carnotaurus horns glowed warm with blood during exertion, they may have radiated heat outward like small thermal vents, a living adaptation to an unforgiving world. Whatever their purpose, they were part of a design that spoke of confidence. Carnotaurus did not need to roar to prove its power. It carried its strength in the quiet geometry of its head, in the steady curve of its horns, in the way its body seemed balanced between motion and control. To look at that skull today is to see both science and mystery carved into stone. The horns rise not as symbols of aggression, but of complexity, the kind that reminds us that even the fiercest creatures were shaped as much by social grace as by survival. In those weathered ridges, you can almost sense the rhythm of a life lived not in constant battle, but in ritual, motion, and quiet endurance. And perhaps long ago on the windswept plains of Patagonia, those horns once caught the last red light of day, glinting above a still body, waiting for the night to fall. In the stillness of the fossil hall, Carnotaurus stands frozen in mid-motion, its bones poised as if ready to sprint. To look at its skeleton is to see movement captured in silence, the outline of an animal built almost entirely for speed. Every part of its body, from its hollow bones to the powerful sweep of its tail, whispers the same message. This was a hunter made to move like lightning across the open plains of its world. When scientists began to study the fossil more closely, the first thing they noticed was how light it was. Despite being nearly 8 meters long, the bones were thin-walled and filled with air pockets, much like those of modern birds. The same principle that lets an eagle soar with strength but not weight was hidden inside this predator's frame. This lightness gave Carnotaurus an advantage. Rare among large carnivores, it could run fast, not just lunge. Its legs told the rest of the story. The thigh bones were strong, anchoring the muscles that powered its stride, but the shins were unusually long. In the animal kingdom, long shins are the hallmark of speed. They act like levers, turning every push of the muscle into greater distance with each step. The shape of Carnotaurus's leg bones, when reconstructed in digital form, revealed a body designed for acceleration. It could likely reach its top speed in only a few seconds, the way a modern cheetah does. But Carnotaurus was no cheetah. It weighed nearly 2 tons and moved on 2 legs, balancing its entire mass on a frame that was both delicate and strong. Its speed was not the smooth sprint of a mammal gliding across grass, but the explosive burst of a reptilian sprinter, sudden, fierce, and brief. It was built for ambush and pursuit, not for long chases. The key to this balance lay in its tail. Carnotaurus's tail was long and deep, a muscular structure that acted like both engine and counterweight. Within its vertebrae, paleontologists found extended ridges that locked together, forming a stiff yet flexible beam. This unique design meant that the tail could not twist easily, but it could store and release enormous power with each stride. The muscles that attached there were among the largest ever seen in a theropod. When they contracted, they pulled the legs backward in a rapid sequence, propelling the animal forward in bursts of astonishing force. The physics of such motion is elegant. Each step began in the tail, where stored energy rippled through the hips, down the shins, and into the claws that bit into the ground. Then, with a twist of the torso and a flex of the long neck, the momentum could be directed into a strike. This coordination between speed and control turned Carnotaurus into one of the most specialized hunters of its time. Its skull, though short, played a crucial part in this design. Unlike the long, heavy jaws of northern predators like Tyrannosaurus, Carnotaurus carried a smaller, compact head. The shorter skull reduced weight at the front of the body, allowing for better balance during high-speed motion. It also concentrated strength where it mattered most, in the neck. The neck vertebrae were thick and ridged, perfect for anchoring muscles capable of quick, snapping movements. When scientists examined the attachment points, they found that the neck likely worked like a whip. With each strike, the head could lash forward, bite, and recoil before the prey could react. It was not designed to crush bones or tear limbs. It was a precision instrument, delivering fast, shallow bites that weakened or startled its victim. This form of attack required coordination more than brute strength. The deep neck, short skull, and light body worked together like a living spring, converting motion into power through rhythm. Carnotaurus did not rely on endurance. It could not chase for long distances or wrestle its prey to the ground. Instead, it depended on speed, timing, and the element of surprise. In the quiet language of evolution, this was a gamble. Nature had stripped away the heavy tools of older predators, the long arms, the crushing jaws, and invested instead in motion. Every adaptation came with a cost. Its small arms could no longer grasp. Its short skull limited the size of prey it could handle, and its stiff tail restricted quick turns. Yet, in the right setting, on the open plains of Patagonia, these limitations became strength. The land was flat and dry, the air hot and shimmering. Here a straight-line runner could thrive. Musculature reconstruction show a creature of extraordinary grace for its size. Its stride, when scaled to a modern frame, would have rivaled the proportional speed of a cheetah, though not its distance. For a few brief moments, Carnotaurus could become a blur, a flash of scaled motion sweeping across the horizon. Then, as quickly as it began, the burst would end. Its heavy muscles needed time to rest, to draw oxygen and recover. Evolution often balances its creations on such fine edges. In Carnotaurus, it chose motion over might, speed over strength. It was a predator shaped by necessity, honed by isolation, and refined by the demands of its harsh, unpredictable land. To look at its skeleton now is to see that gamble immortalized in bone. The slender limbs, the deep tail, the narrow head, all locked in harmony. Perhaps that is why the fossil seems so alive, even in stillness. The bones, though ancient, hold the posture of an animal caught between power and fragility, the moment before the sprint begins. It is a portrait of motion turned to stone, a reminder that life's greatest strengths are often born from its greatest risks. There is a quiet kind of mystery in the bones of Carnotaurus. It is the kind that does not shout for attention, but whispers through the details that seem, at first, to make no sense. The horns, the short skull, the deep neck, all of them tell stories of strength and speed, but tucked beneath those grand designs lies something far stranger, something so small it almost seems like a joke played by evolution itself. Its arms, Carnotaurus, had the shortest arms of any large carnivorous dinosaur ever discovered, even shorter than those of Tyrannosaurus. Where the great northern predator's arms could at least move, curl, or clutch, Carnotaurus's limbs were reduced to tiny stubs, each barely long enough to reach past its rib cage. They ended in four slender fingers, pressed tightly together, with claws that curved but never truly grasped. From a distance, they would have looked almost invisible, tucked against the chest, like forgotten relics of a time when arms had once mattered. When scientists first uncovered the skeleton, this feature caused more debate than almost anything else. How could such a powerful hunter have arms so small that they seemed useless? To call them functionless felt strange, because in nature, nothing lasts without a reason. The answers, as they often are, lay not in what was visible, but in what the rest of the body had already become. Carnotaurus was a creature designed for movement. Every part of its anatomy spoke of speed, balance, and efficiency. In that design, the arms were not an oversight, but a sacrifice. As the species evolved, hunting no longer depended on grabbing or holding prey. Its power came from the legs and neck, from the sudden bursts of velocity that ended hunts before a struggle began. And so, over countless generations, its arms faded into the background, shrinking into what biologists call vestigial structures, pieces of anatomy that once had purpose, now repurposed by evolution's long patience. But shrinking does not mean weak. Beneath those tiny limbs, the shoulder girdle, the cluster of bones that anchored the arms, remained large and heavily built. Muscles there were still thick and strong, suggesting that movement had not disappeared completely. Some scientists believe the arms could swing slightly or flex inward, perhaps used for balance during rapid motion or for quick adjustments as the predator lunged forward. Others think they played a small role during mating or while the animal rose from rest. But if they had any function at all, it was subtle, secondary to the grand machinery of speed that defined Carnotaurus's life. Viewed closely, the arms tell a different kind of story, one not of weakness, but of precision. Evolution had stripped away what was no longer needed, in the same way that a cheetah's body is thin to cut through air, or a fish's fins are shaped to glide. Carnotaurus's arms were streamlined to reduce drag. By tucking close to its body, they allowed smoother airflow when it ran, no extra motion, no unnecessary resistance. Every gram of weight and curve of bone was refined for the same purpose, to move faster, cleaner, and with greater control. It is easy to think of evolution as building up, always adding more complexity, but often it does the opposite. It removes, it refines, it trades what is once essential for something new, something more fitting to the present moment. In Carnotaurus, that process had gone to an extreme. Its arms were echoes of an older blueprint, remnants of predators that once grabbed their prey, now replaced by a lineage that conquered through speed and precision. The fossil record is filled with such moments of surrender. Whales once had hind legs, birds once had claws, snakes once had limbs that helped them crawl before they learned to coil and glide. In each case, evolution found new answers, and the old designs faded into memory. Carnotaurus stands among those creatures as one of nature's boldest experiments, a hunter that abandoned the reach of its arms in exchange for the rush of movement. When scientists reconstructed the muscles of its chest, they found something fascinating. The muscles that once powered the forelimbs had not disappeared. They had shifted, merging into the torso, feeding strength into the neck and legs instead. It was as though the energy that once flowed into grasping was redirected toward motion. The body rewired itself, choosing speed over grip, efficiency over excess. There is a quiet kind of beauty in this adaptation. To see those tiny arms is to witness nature's humility, the willingness to let go of what no longer serves, even if it once defined the creature's ancestors. Evolution, after all, is not about perfection. It is about response, about survival in the moment, no matter how strange the result may seem to us. If we could see Carnotaurus alive, running across the plains of Cretaceous Patagonia, its arms would vanish in the blur. Only the movement would remain, the rhythm of legs pounding the earth, the deep neck driving the head forward, the horns glinting in the sun. What might have looked like a flaw in stillness would have disappeared in motion. The arms that time forgot were not mistakes. They were the quiet cost of perfection, a reminder that sometimes, to master one thing, nature must release another. And in the balance between strength and speed, Carnotaurus found its place, a creature sculpted not by excess, but by absence, running through history with the lightness of a design pared down to its essence. In the quiet rooms of museums, where fossils rest beneath soft light, there are bones that tell of motion, and then there are miracles that tell of touch. Among the remains of Carnotaurus, one of those miracles survived. It was not a claw or a tooth, or even the curve of a horn, but something infinitely more fragile, the impression of its skin. When José Bonaparte and his team uncovered the skeleton decades ago, they expected stone, not texture. Yet pressed against the rock beside the bones were delicate patterns, faint at first, like ripples in sand. The closer they brushed, the clearer they became. Patches of fossilized skin stretched across parts of the tail, the neck, and the side of the body, and what those patterns revealed changed how scientists imagined dinosaurs forever. The skin was not smooth, nor covered in feathers, as some other species were beginning to show. Instead, it was a mosaic of scales, arranged in neat, overlapping rows. Some were small and pebbly, each one no larger than a fingernail, while others rose into larger cones, small, rounded bumps that ran in ordered lines along the flanks. These raised features are called scutes, and in life, they would have given the animal's skin a rugged, armor-like texture. Under the sun of the Cretaceous plains, this surface must have shimmered faintly, a pattern of light and shadow rolling over its body as it moved. The scales were not uniform. They varied in size and density depending on where they grew. Along the neck and back, they were thicker, perhaps to guard against the claws or teeth of rivals. Along the sides, they became smaller and more flexible, allowing the body to bend and twist with speed. It was the skin of a creature built for movement, yet forged for survival. To find such detail preserved is almost unheard of. Flesh and skin decay long before bone turns to stone. It takes an extraordinary combination of timing, sediment, and stillness for soft tissue to leave its mark. Perhaps a layer of volcanic ash, settled quickly over the body, or mud from a retreating flood covered it before scavengers arrived. Whatever the cause, those moments of burial created a time capsule, a thin layer of stone that carried not just the shape of the creature, but the very texture of its life. The pattern of the scales led scientists to wonder what purpose they served beyond protection. Some proposed that the arrangement of scutes could have helped regulate body temperature. In hot, arid regions, raised surfaces increase the amount of air that can pass between them, allowing heat to dissipate more efficiently. Others thought the texture may have helped blend the animal into its surroundings. On the plains of Patagonia, where dust and stone shared the same muted palette, a dappled hide would have softened the body's outline against the horizon. No pigments remain, so we cannot know its true color. Perhaps it was a mix of browns and ochres, blending with the dry grass, or maybe patches of deeper red or black traced along its back, emphasizing the ridges and the line of the horns. In many living reptiles today, color and texture combine to speak, to warn, to attract, to conceal. Carnotaurus may have carried that same silent language in its skin, invisible to us now, but clear to those that once shared its world. The texture also spoke of endurance. Unlike the soft hides of animals from wetter climates, this was the skin of a creature that lived under a burning sun and on hard ground. Each bump and ridge helped shield it from the harshness of its land. When the wind swept grit across the plains, the scales would have taken the sting. When the air dried the soil to dust, the armor would have kept its body from losing precious moisture. In this way, the skin was both barrier and adaptation, a living suit of survival. Scientists studying the fossilized patches under magnification noticed something else: subtle variations in scale orientation, especially along the tail. These patterns suggested that Carnotaurus's skin was not static. It may have flexed in waves as the tail swung, shifting texture to reflect light differently with movement. Such a dynamic surface could have made the predator appear larger or more intimidating when in motion, especially if sunlight flashed across its ridged sides during a run. To imagine that is to see the animal not as a skeleton, but as a living being again. The deep neck moves, the tail flicks, and the scales ripple under tension. The air around it shimmers with heat, and for a brief moment, the fossil is no longer stone but skin once more. This discovery gave paleontology something precious, a bridge between bone and life. Before Carnotaurus, most reconstructions of dinosaurs were shaped by guesswork and comparisons. Its skin impressions anchored imagination in evidence. They showed that dinosaurs were not creatures of smooth, uniform hides, but beings of intricate surfaces, built from patterns as complex as those found in any living animal. Each scale, each raised bump, is a whisper from that vanished world, telling of how this predator stood against the elements that shaped it. To see those marks today is to hold a connection that stretches across 70 million years, a fragile link between the living and the lost. And so, in the stone of Patagonia, the skin of Carnotaurus survived time itself, a memory carved in detail fine enough to remember sunlight, wind, and motion. It remains one of the rarest gifts evolution and geology have ever shared, a portrait of texture from a world long gone, preserved by chance and touched once more by curious hands millions of years later. The skull of Carnotaurus is unlike any other predator that walked the earth. It does not stretch long and narrow like the jaws of a crocodile, nor does it carry the heavy, crushing mass of a tyrannosaurus. Instead, it is compact, deep, and beautifully strange, a head shaped less for brute power and more for precision. If you were to stand before it today, cast in stone beneath the soft light of a museum, you might notice how its profile breaks the expectations of what a hunter should look like. The snout rises sharply from the jaw, curving toward those distinctive horns. The sides are pressed in slightly, giving the skull a narrow, almost aerodynamic outline. To early paleontologists, it seemed compressed, as if nature had taken the standard design of a predator's head and reshaped it for speed. The eyes, set high on the skull and facing forward, tell another story. In most large carnivorous dinosaurs, the eyes are positioned along the sides of the head, granting a wide field of view, but little overlap between what each eye can see. Carnotaurus is different. Its eyes face slightly inward, overlapping just enough to allow true depth perception. This small anatomical detail carries immense meaning. It means this predator could judge distance, not roughly, but precisely. It could track movement and know exactly how far and how fast it needed to strike. The head of Carnotaurus, short and deep, worked in harmony with its powerful neck. The muscles that attached along the base of the skull formed a thick column of strength that could drive the jaws downward in a flash. Studies of its jaw joints reveal that the lower jaw could open and close with remarkable quickness. Unlike predators that relied on holding and crushing, Carnotaurus likely snapped. Its bites were fast, shallow, and repeated in rapid succession, a technique designed to wound, disorient, and weaken rather than kill in a single blow. This was not a clumsy hunter. Every movement of its head, from the tilt of the skull to the recoil of the jaw, was a calculated act of precision. The bones behind the eyes supported attachment points for muscles that could stabilize the head even while the body was in motion. This meant Carnotaurus could strike without needing to stop running. Imagine a creature sprinting across the plains, dust swirling beneath its feet, its eyes locked forward, and its neck coiling like a spring, the jaws snapping out and pulling back in one fluid rhythm. When scientists compared the skull's construction with other theropods, they found that Carnotaurus broke nearly every familiar pattern. Its skull was far lighter than that of a typical predator of its size, reducing the energy needed to move it. The snout was broad at the tip, which might have allowed it to grab or strike larger surfaces of flesh, spreading the impact rather than puncturing deep. The teeth, small and blade-like, added to this efficiency. They were not built to crush bone, but to cut through muscle and skin quickly, leaving wide but shallow wounds. Its bite was a contrast to the massive power of northern predators like Tyrannosaurus. Where those giants relied on weight and force, Carnotaurus relied on timing. It was a hunter of precision, not pressure. Its entire skull, from the forward set eyes to the jaw's pivot points, reflected the same principle that shaped the rest of its body: speed above all. The shape of the nose and the openings in the skull also reveal something subtle. Large air spaces surrounded the nasal passages, forming a lightweight but strong framework. These hollows may have helped reduce weight while amplifying certain sounds. Some researchers suggest that Carnotaurus could have produced low, resonant calls that traveled across open terrain, vibrations that could signal territory or communicate over long distances. If true, its voice would have been deep and rhythmic, carrying through the dry air like a drumbeat rolling across the plains. Even the surface of the skull adds to its mystery. Fossil impressions show fine grooves where blood vessels once ran beneath the skin. This suggests that parts of its face might have been covered in keratin, or scales that changed color or reflected light. The horns, with their network of vessels, may have stood out vividly against the rest of the skull, catching the sun during displays or confrontations. The face of Carnotaurus, then, was not only a tool of the hunt but also a signal, a display of dominance, recognition, and identity within its species. In comparing Carnotaurus to its relatives, paleontologists see an evolutionary experiment pushed to its limits. Abelisaurids, its broader family, were already known for their short skulls and small arms, but Carnotaurus represented the extreme. It was as if evolution had taken every trait that favored speed, focus, and minimalism and distilled them into a single form. Its head became the centerpiece of this transformation, a perfect blend of power and restraint. To watch it in imagination is to witness movement turned into purpose. The eyes fix on a target, the body lowers, muscles tense, and then the strike, not wild or chaotic, but sharp and exact, a motion that begins and ends in the space of a heartbeat. In the story of life, few creatures embody adaptation so precisely. The face of Carnotaurus is not just a mask of a predator, it is a sculpture of evolution itself, carved by time and necessity. Every ridge, every curve, every hollow speaks of a design refined by isolation and challenge. And though the bones are silent now, the shape they hold still carries that strange, quiet brilliance, the face of a creature that turned motion into art and survival into elegance. The world that Carnotaurus ruled was not a world of comfort. It was a land of extremes, where life endured not through abundance, but through adaptation. By the time this horned predator walked the earth, the late Cretaceous was already beginning to unravel. The climate, once steady and humid, had grown uncertain. Seasons lengthened, storms burned hotter, and droughts lasted longer. Across the southern continent, what had once been a mosaic of lush forests was slowly giving way to open plains. In the region that would one day be called Patagonia, the rivers still wound their way across the land, but their paths had grown thinner, their banks more brittle. Trees that once reached toward the sky now clung close to the earth, their roots gripping dry soil for survival. Ferns and cycads still dotted the horizon, but their green no longer stretched endlessly. Between them spread wide stretches of sand and low grass, broken by patches of volcanic stone that glimmered faintly under the heat. It was a restless landscape. Volcanoes along the western edge of the continent still breathed from time to time, leaving fields of black ash that hardened into glassy rock. When the winds came, they carried dust so fine that it drifted for miles, softening the shapes of the plains. Fire followed drought, and drought followed fire. Life learned to grow back quickly or not at all. Carnotaurus was born into this rhythm of loss and renewal. Its body, with its long legs and narrow frame, reflected the openness of its world. It was a creature made for distance and speed, not the shadows of forests. Where earlier predators might have stalked through dense vegetation, Carnotaurus hunted under the glare of the sun, chasing prey across dry flats where every movement left a trace of dust. In such a harsh environment, the body itself becomes an instrument of survival. The rough texture of Carnotaurus's skin, with its small scales and larger bumps, helped scatter sunlight and reduce heat. Absorption. The deep ridges along its sides may have helped circulate air as it moved, carrying warmth away from its body. Even its narrow build, the way the ribs curved inward, spoke of an animal designed to handle heat. It was lean not by chance, but by necessity. The late Cretaceous in South America was also a time of isolation. As the continents drifted apart, the southern lands grew more distant from the north. With oceans cutting across the globe, species that once shared ancestors were now trapped in separate worlds. Patagonia became a crucible, where evolution worked in solitude. The animals that survived there did so by becoming something entirely their own. In this changing climate, predators like Carnotaurus faced both opportunity and danger. The open plains made hunting easier in some ways. Prey could be seen from far away, but harder in others, as cover was scarce and heat drained strength quickly. A chase that lasted too long could mean exhaustion, and in a world where water was precious, energy had to be spent wisely. Nature answered this challenge not with power, but with precision. Carnotaurus's body shows every sign of specialization, every adjustment to its demanding home. Its long shins and stiff tail turned speed into art, allowing it to close distances in seconds. Its short skull and deep neck worked together to strike swiftly, using motion rather than muscle to subdue. It was not built for the drawn-out battles of larger predators, but for moments that ended in an instant. Even its horns, those strange ornaments of bone, may have found purpose in this changing world. In open plains, visibility meant communication. The horns could have signaled strength or readiness to rivals across long distances. Perhaps they caught the light as Carnotaurus moved through the haze, a quiet warning carried by the shimmer of heat. The same environment that shaped Carnotaurus also sculpted its prey. The great titanosaurs, the long-necked herbivores of the Perseus south, had grown tougher hides and slower, more deliberate movements, conserving water and energy. Smaller plant eaters clustered near rivers and low wetlands, feeding in bursts before the dry season returned. Every creature, from the smallest lizard to the largest herbivore, bore the marks of a world in transition. As the air grew warmer and rainfall less predictable, evolution began to favor the quick and the specialized. Each generation became slightly more refined for the demands of dryness, for the chase across bare ground, for the long wait between meals. In this way, climate did not just shape the land, it wrote itself into the bones of its inhabitants. When scientists study the fossils from this period, they see the fingerprints of that transformation everywhere. The plants show thicker leaves, the animals lighter bones, the soil's traces of repeated burning. Patagonia had become a land both ancient and new, an environment rewriting itself with each century that passed, and, yet, even in its volatility, it remained beautiful. Imagine the evenings when the sun sank low behind the distant mountains and the air shimmered with dust. The plains would glow red and gold, the silhouettes of dinosaurs moving slowly through the haze. Carnotaurus, standing tall on a ridge of stone, would have watched the world in that fading light, a creature perfectly matched to the moment it lived in. Its body, its motion, its very design were answers to a question the earth kept asking. How do you survive when the ground itself is changing? Carnotaurus was one of nature's boldest replies. It did not resist the fire and sand. It became part of them, and in doing so, it left behind not only bones and impressions, but a story of balance, of how life reshapes itself again and again to meet the shifting face of the earth. In the closing chapters of the Cretaceous, when the continents were scattering like drifting islands, the southern lands nurtured their own dynasty of hunters, while the northern world was ruled by the heavy-footed monarchs of strength. The tyrannosaurs, the southern continents, told a different story. Here, in isolation, predators evolved not to crush, but to outmaneuver. They were leaner, stranger, shaped by the heat and silence of their world. Among them walked the abelisaurids, a family of hunters that shared a single ancestral blueprint but filled it with endless variation. Their bones have been found scattered across ancient Gondwana, from the dry basins of Argentina to the red soils of Madagascar and the riverbeds of India. Each species was a local expression of the same design, adapted to the landscapes that raised them. There was Abelisaurus, the elder of the line, whose discovery first revealed this southern pattern. Its skull was massive and thick, built for raw power, yet its arms had already begun to shrink, setting the stage for a new kind of predator. On the distant island of Madagascar lived Majungasaurus, smaller but no less fearsome, with a single bony bump rising from its skull and jaws that could lock in prolonged grips. It was slow, deliberate, and capable of feeding on its own kind when survival demanded it. And then there was Extinction, found in the same lands that Carnotaurus once ruled, a larger and heavier cousin, its name meaning the explosion-born reptile, a nod to the volcanic earth that entombed it. These were the shadows that shared Carnotaurus's world. Relatives, competitors, perhaps even rivals. Each carved its own place in the food chain, each an answer to the same question evolution kept asking in the South. How does a hunter thrive when the land itself is unstable? Carnotaurus stood apart from them all. Its design was not one of excess or brutality, but refinement. Where Abelisaurus had a broad skull built for power, Carnotaurus carried a shorter one, lighter and more aerodynamic. Where Extinction was massive and muscular, Carnotaurus was lean, built like a blade meant to cut through air. Even among the Abelisaurids, it seemed like a creature on the edge of innovation, faster, quieter, more balanced. Its legs, long and finely built, told of a predator that relied on bursts of motion rather than sheer force. In a family of heavy hunters, it was the runner. Its center of gravity sat farther forward, giving it a posture made for chasing across the open plains that were spreading across Patagonia. Its tail, reinforced by stiff interlocking bones, acted as a counterweight, keeping balance during the sprint. In its anatomy, one could see the echoes of speed, the long shins, the light frame, the elegant flow from hip to neck. Carnotaurus's head, though smaller than those of its kin, was no less formidable. Its deep neck muscles, attached to short, strong vertebrae, gave it the ability to strike with a snap rather than a crush. Where other predators might pin their prey, Carnotaurus would strike and release, relying on agility and precision. Its face, with its forward-facing eyes, added something rare in its family: depth perception. It could see its world in 3 dimensions, judging distance with accuracy, a skill that made its strikes even deadlier. In this way, Carnotaurus occupied a role no other predator could fill. It was neither the largest nor the strongest, but it was the fastest. In a land where open spaces stretched wider each century and the prey had adapted to run, this was the shape evolution favored. The long-legged titanosaurs that once moved slowly through forests were now crossing vast grasslands, and only a hunter that could match their pace could survive. This balance of speed and precision made Carnotaurus the southern mirror of a predator it would never meet, the tyrant of the north, Tyrannosaurus rex. Yet the two could not have been more different. The northern king was a symbol of power, with jaws that could crush bone and legs built for endurance. Carnotaurus was the artist's answer, a sculpted silhouette of motion. It did not rule by strength, but by finesse. Where Tyrannosaurus dominated through overwhelming force, Carnotaurus mastered the split second, the perfect moment when speed met opportunity. To call it the southern answer to Tyrannosaurus is not to compare them as rivals, but as reflections of their worlds. The north was dense with forests and moisture, its giants slow-moving and heavily built. The south was a place of fire and openness, where speed and specialization decided survival. Carnotaurus embodied that landscape, every muscle, every bone, an echo of the wind-swept plains it roamed. The evidence left in the rock tells of this divergence. In the fossil beds of Patagonia, the remains of Carnotaurus lie apart from those of its heavier cousins. Even in death, it seems to have lived differently, its bones carried farther by water or wind, suggesting it may have wandered alone across larger territories. This solitary life fits its design, a predator that needed space, not company, to practice the art of motion it had evolved to perfect. In the imagination of science, the Abelisaurids form a chorus of evolutionary voices, each shaped by its corner of the world. But in that chorus, Carnotaurus sings the clearest note. It is the expression of a lineage distilled to speed, an animal that carried the refinement of millions of years in every step. When we think of apex predators, we often think of dominance, of towering power. Carnotaurus offers a gentler truth that mastery can take many forms. In its quiet way, it was the South's final masterpiece, an apex not of might, but of motion, and across the open lands of Cretaceous Patagonia, where dust rose beneath the hooves of giants and the horizon shimmered with heat, it moved like a shadow, swift, silent, and absolute. The world Carnotaurus inherited was one of heat, motion, and distance. Across the plains of ancient Patagonia, where the wind carried the scent of dust and sun-baked earth, life moved in cautious rhythms. Herds of herbivores gathered near scattered rivers, their shadows long and still against the pale ground, and somewhere beyond the wavering horizon, hidden by silence and patience, the horned predator waited. Its body, so strange and specialized, revealed much about how it lived. Bones are not only remnants of the past, they are blueprints of behavior. Each joint, curve, and connection in the skeleton of Carnotaurus tells a story of how it hunted and survived. The long legs, built with lean, spring-like bones, spoke of speed but not endurance. This was not an animal made for long pursuits. Its muscles, particularly those in the tail and thighs, were designed for explosive bursts of power. The vertebrae along the tail were locked together by tall ridges of bone, forming a stiff structure that acted like a coiled spring. When Carnotaurus lunged forward, those massive tail muscles released energy in an instant, propelling the body forward with astonishing force. Such anatomy is the mark of an ambush predator. It would not have chased its prey across open fields, for that would waste precious energy in the hot, arid world it inhabited. Instead, it likely used stealth and timing. It might have waited in low brush or behind rocky outcrops, its dappled skin blending with the color of the landscape. When an unsuspecting herbivore wandered close enough, Carnotaurus would have moved with sudden precision, striking before the prey even had the chance to turn. The shape of its head supported this idea. The short skull and deep neck muscles gave it the ability to deliver quick, snapping bites rather than long, crushing ones. The jaws closed rapidly, like a trap designed for speed over force. Each tooth was small and blade-like, perfect for slicing through flesh rather than holding onto it. This suggests that Carnotaurus relied on wounding its prey, striking fast, retreating, and then striking again if necessary. Its eyes, facing forward, gave it the advantage of depth perception. In an open world, where prey could spot danger from afar, this was a crucial edge. It could judge the distance of a running target with accuracy, choosing the perfect moment to launch. Even the horns, strange and ornamental as they appeared, may have had a secondary purpose in combat. They could have been used to ram or bump prey, stunning it just long enough for the jaws to act. The prey it hunted tells another part of the story. Patagonia, in the late Cretaceous, was home to a variety of herbivores, long-necked titanosaurs that moved in slow, steady herds, and duck-billed hadrosaurs that grazed in groups. The largest of the sauropods would have been far too big to bring down, but the young or injured were vulnerable. A single strike from Carnotaurus's jaws could cause enough damage to slow them, and a wounded animal in that harsh environment would rarely recover. It may also have targeted smaller, faster herbivores, those that relied on agility more than size. Here, Carnotaurus's speed and flexibility would have been an advantage. Its long shins allowed for rapid acceleration, and its narrow chest reduced air resistance as it ran. The balance between tail and head was so finely tuned that even sharp turns could be executed with minimal effort. Some scientists have studied the movement of its tail and found that it may have acted like a giant lever, storing kinetic energy as the predator prepared to strike. Imagine it crouched low, the tail stiff behind it, muscles coiling with silent precision. Then, with a sudden release, it would surge forward, a blur of horns, dust, and motion. In that instant, the entire body functioned as one perfect mechanism of speed and balance. The design of Carnotaurus's arms also supports this method of hunting, with limbs so small they played no part in grasping prey. The animal relied entirely on its jaws and momentum. Every detail of its anatomy was streamlined toward one purpose: to hit fast, hit hard, and finish quickly. Unlike the slower, heavier predators of the north, Carnotaurus was a creature of finesse. Its hunting style reflected the challenges of its world: vast spaces, scorching temperatures, and prey that could not afford to linger near danger. In such a place, hesitation meant starvation. Efficiency was everything. Perhaps it hunted alone, moving silently through its territory, guided by scent and sound. Its feet, broad but light, could have carried it across soft earth without noise. When it struck, it did so with accuracy born of countless generations of refinement. To envision it in motion is to witness power contained within grace. The predator does not roar or thrash. It waits. Muscles tighten, air stirs, then it moves, swift, decisive, a shape drawn through time by the will to survive. Every part of its body worked toward that single, fleeting moment when motion became purpose. And when the dust settled, the plains fell quiet again, the rhythm of life resuming as if nothing had changed. In that balance between silence and speed, Carnotaurus found its place in the world, not as the largest or fiercest, but as one of evolution's most elegant hunters. A predator built for precision, sculpted by a landscape that demanded nothing less. And though millions of years have passed, the memory of that motion still lingers in its bones, written in the perfect harmony of form and intent. Life in the late Cretaceous was a constant balancing act between stillness and motion, survival and display. Predators and prey shared the same harsh landscapes, not always in pursuit of death, but often in silent competitions that shaped who thrived and who faded away. For Carnotaurus, existence was more than the hunt. It was performance, a continuous test of strength, patience, and presence against others of its kind. Paleontologists who studied the bones of Carnotaurus began to notice something curious. Across several skulls and horn cores, small marks and microfractures told stories that teeth alone could not explain. These were not the breaks of hunting or the scars of prey struggling to escape. They were wear patterns, symmetrical and deliberate, etched into the bone like the memory of repeated impact. Carnotaurus, it seemed, did not only hunt, it fought. But these battles were not random acts of fury. They carried rhythm and restraint, more like a ritual than a riot. The shape of its horns and the structure of its neck revealed an elegance in their purpose. Each horn curved forward, thick at the base and sturdy at the tip, angled perfectly for locking and pushing rather than stabbing. Beneath them, the neck vertebrae formed a short, powerful column of bone, reinforced to absorb shock. In life, that neck would have been thick with muscle, each tendon coiled for control. When scientists ran computer models on the skull of Carnotaurus, they found that it could withstand enormous force from the side, more than from the front. This suggested that the animals may have clashed not by ramming head-on like rams or goats, but by pressing their heads together and shoving sideways, twisting and testing each other's endurance. The motion would have been rhythmic, a series of slow pushes and pauses, dust rising in small clouds around their feet as their tails shifted for balance. These were not battles fought in chaos, they were performances of dominance, ancient, echoes of the same displays seen in many animals today. A pair of male chameleons will puff their throats and sway in color before ever striking. Crocodiles will bellow and lift their bodies high to appear larger than their rivals. Cassowaries, those great birds of the tropics, may fan their feathers and strut in slow circles to establish territory long before a single blow is exchanged. Carnotaurus likely followed a similar script, its contests beginning not with violence, but with gesture. Its body language would have been part of its weaponry. The broad neck, flared and muscular, could have been arched in threat displays. Its skin, patterned in mottled shades, might have caught the light in ways that signaled strength or maturity. In the open plains of Patagonia, where there were few places to hide, appearances mattered. The sun itself became part of the performance, glinting along the scales of each contestant as they faced one another. The stakes of these duels were high. The late Cretaceous climate was dry and unforgiving, and resources were scarce. Waterholes could shrink to cracked mud in a season, and suitable nesting grounds were limited to the cooler edges of river valleys. Every patch of shade, every cluster of trees, and every rise of land could mean survival. Dominance decided not only who mated, but who drank first, who fed without challenge, and who led the small territories that marked the shifting map of their world. When two Carnotaurus met at the edge of a watering place, the air itself might have grown heavy. They would circle, their tails held stiff for balance, their bodies low and steady. Then, slowly, the horns would meet with a muffled crack. They pushed, paused, adjusted, and pushed again, their muscles flexing in slow rhythm. Dust rose around them, swirling like smoke as they strained, neither willing to give ground too soon. Each test of strength was a language written in motion. The thick bones of their skull bases acted as natural shock absorbers, diffusing the pressure through the neck and shoulders. Unlike creatures that fought to destroy, Carnotaurus fought to measure. Injury was a risk, but rarely the goal. When one gave way, it did so with grace, turning aside, lowering its head, and retreating across the plain. The victor, breathing heavily, would stand tall in silence. There was no roar, no chase, only stillness, and the quiet recognition of rank restored. In this way, their horns, so often imagined only as weapons of predation, reveal a gentler truth. They were also tools of balance, of communication, of order. Evolution had crafted them not just for survival, but for social understanding, a way for strength to be tested without the constant cost of blood. To see them now, frozen in fossil form, is to sense that tension captured in stillness. The horns curve forward, forever waiting for that slow, deliberate contact that once decided so much. Life in that ancient world was harsh, but it was not senseless. The fights of Carnotaurus were not chaos, but choreography. They were slow and deliberate, guided by instinct and ritual rather than rage. In a land where survival meant performance, even power had its choreography. Each horn locked in the silence of purpose, not rage, and across those burning plains, strength moved not as fury, but as rhythm, the steady heartbeat of life's oldest dance. In the quiet sculpture of Carnotaurus's skull, the eyes are what hold you. They rest high and forward, peering out from beneath the curve of the brow horns like two sentinels fixed in eternal watch. Most dinosaurs, even the great predators of the north, carried eyes on the sides of their heads, granting them a broad view of their surroundings but little sense of depth. Carnotaurus broke that rule. Its eyes faced slightly inward, overlapping just enough for both to focus on the same point in space. It had binocular vision, the rare gift of seeing not only shape, but distance. This trait changed everything about the way it perceived the world. Where others saw outlines, Carnotaurus saw volume. It could measure how far its prey stood, how fast it moved, and where it would be a heartbeat later. The open plains of its home demanded that kind of accuracy, There were no forests thick enough to hide within, no shadows deep enough to ambush from. Its survival depended on timing, and timing began with sight. The eyes themselves were large for its skull size, their sockets rounded and forward leaning. This suggests that Carnotaurus was not merely aware of motion, but drawn to it. It was a creature that tracked the slightest flicker, a tail whipping, a leg shifting, a ripple of dust stirred by movement. To such a predator, stillness would have been invisible, but motion would have lit the world like fire. From what scientists can tell, Carnotaurus likely lived and hunted by daylight. The size and shape of its eye sockets, along with the bony ridges above them, suggest it was built for bright conditions. The horns may even have helped shade its vision, much like the brow of a hawk or the ridges above a cat's eyes that cut the glare. In the blinding sun of Patagonia, where heat shimmered off the earth, every bit of protection mattered. To imagine how Carnotaurus saw its world is to step briefly into its perspective. The horizon stretches wide and pale. The air trembles with heat. In the distance, herds of herbivores graze near the last traces of green, their forms breaking and bending through the haze. Through eyes shaped for depth and speed, each movement becomes a signal, a potential chase, a test of reaction. Its sight worked hand in hand with its precision. Carnotaurus was not a chaser that relied on endurance, as earlier sections of its body have shown. It was a sprinter that relied on a single, perfect moment. The ability to judge depth allowed it to know that moment, to strike from just the right distance, where one burst of speed would end the hunt before the prey even understood what was happening. In the animal kingdom, vision like this is not common among large predators. Most rely on smell or hearing. Yet in Carnotaurus, the eyes took center stage, becoming the anchor for its entire hunting strategy. The skull's proportions, the neck's strength, and the coordination of the limbs all worked together to follow where its gaze led. Every muscle in its body was an extension of its sight. If you were to compare it to creatures alive today, it would not be to crocodiles or lizards, but to raptors and big cats, hunters of motion and light. A falcon locks onto its target far below, adjusting its wings through the rush of wind to meet its prey at the exact second of impact. A cheetah watches the subtle twitch of a gazelle's leg and calculates the direction it will leap before it moves. Carnotaurus would have shared that same precision, the same mathematical grace born from instinct. Its binocular vision gave it the power to read the landscape as a living map, the curves of terrain, the shadows that fell across the ground, the places where prey might trip or slow. In the split seconds of pursuit, these details would have made the difference between success and failure. Each flicker of an eye was a calculation, every step the answer to a moving equation written in heat and light. Some scientists suggest that the forward orientation of its eyes may also have influenced its behavior beyond hunting. It may have been capable of recognizing individuals of its own kind or reading body language from a distance, something that would have been useful during the ritualized displays and contests of strength it likely engaged in. To look into another, Carnotaurus's eyes was not to see a blank predator's stare, but to meet a gaze, aware of focus, of proximity, of boundaries. Its eyesight was a bridge between its world and ours, a reminder that vision is not just about seeing, but about understanding. Carnotaurus lived in a landscape where light was constant and merciless, where movement decided life or death. Its eyes were not merely tools of survival, but instruments of comprehension. Through them, it could measure time, anticipate change, and find balance in a world that rarely offered mercy. When its skeleton was uncovered, those hollow sockets still held their quiet forward gaze, as if watching across the eons. They remain empty now, yet their placement still tells a story of awareness. In the dry stone, one can still sense the vigilance that once defined this creature, a focus sharpened by the brightness of its world, a patience shaped by endless waiting, and a mind tuned to motion in the stillness of the plains. For all its speed and strength, Carnotaurus's greatest weapon may not have been its legs or horns, but the way it saw. Through those forward-facing eyes, the southern predator could read the rhythm of its world, knowing when to move and when to pause. It was vision not just of distance, but of timing, the silent art of a hunter that saw life itself in motion. The world of Carnotaurus was not gentle. The air above Patagonia shimmered beneath a relentless sun, and the land stretched wide and dry beneath it. Water was a promise that came and went with the seasons, and life moved in rhythm with the heat. In such a place, to survive was to balance motion with endurance, strength with restraint. Carnotaurus was a creature sculpted by that balance, its entire body a conversation between heat and survival. Its bones tell of this adaptation more clearly than words ever could. The torso of Carnotaurus was unusually narrow, its ribs angled inward and its chest slim compared to most predators of its time. This shape did more than make it swift. It gave the animal a smaller surface area to trap heat, allowing warm air to pass more easily around its body as it moved. Where other giants carried bulk like armor, Carnotaurus carried lightness like a shield against the sun. Beneath its fossilized skin impressions, scientists found hints of structures that speak to the same story. Rows of small, raised scales, and larger bumps that ran in subtle lines along the body. Between them lay traces of fine vascular patterns, networks of blood vessels that once pulsed close to the surface. These channels likely acted as natural radiators, helping to release heat from within. When the predator stood still under the sun, these vessels would have drawn warm blood toward the skin, where moving air could cool it before returning it deeper into the body. The large muscles of its neck and legs, while built for speed and precision, also played a role in this balance. In modern animals, heavy muscles can trap heat, but they can also serve as reservoirs, places to store and slowly release it when temperatures fall at night. Patagonia in the late Cretaceous was a land of extremes, where days scorched and nights chilled. Carnotaurus carried in its frame the ability to live in both worlds, neither overwhelmed by the heat nor slowed by the cold. To understand its adaptations, it helps to look at the modern world, where similar strategies still unfold in the bodies of living creatures. The monitor lizard, one of today's most active reptiles, controls its body temperature not by sweating, but through motion and airflow. It basks, it moves, it opens and closes the flow of blood beneath its skin. In the great mammals of hot savannas, lions, cheetahs, antelopes, the principle is much the same. Each balances energy carefully, hunting or moving in bursts, then resting in shade until the body finds equilibrium again. Carnotaurus, though from another age, followed this same rhythm written deep into the language of evolution. Its long legs, aside from their role in hunting, also gave it distance from the heat radiating off the ground. In the open plains, the earth itself could become a mirror of the sun, burning from below. But with a stride that lifted its body high and carried it swiftly across the terrain, Carnotaurus could move through the heat without being swallowed by it. Its narrow chest and elevated lungs would have kept its breathing efficient, its airways shielded from the hottest layers near the ground. Even its skin, patterned and rough, told of adaptation to light and temperature. The mosaic of scales, alternating between large and small, may have broken the reflection of sunlight, dispersing glare and preventing overheating. Some scientists imagine the surface to have been colored in muted tones of earth, shades that blended with the land but also managed the sunlight that fell upon them. It would not have needed brilliance to command attention. Its presence alone, sculpted by the climate that shaped it, would have made it stand apart. Patagonia's environment was not constant. Fires swept through the grasslands, lightning flashed across dry skies, and long periods of drought gave way to sudden storms. In such cycles, only the adaptable endured. Carnotaurus's anatomy was not only a testament to hunting efficiency, but to environmental mastery. Its metabolism, somewhere between the rapid warmth of mammals and the steady coolness of reptiles, was likely finely tuned, fast enough to power bursts of motion, yet measured enough to conserve energy when food or water grew scarce. When paleontologists studied the bone tissue of Carnotaurus, they found evidence of fast growth, a trait common among active predators. But the structure of the bones also hinted at control, at a metabolism capable of slowing during hardship. This combination allowed the animal to live through the oscillations of feast and famine that defined its world. It was, in every sense, an apex predator, not just by dominance, but by resilience. The heat shaped its habits as much as its body. Hunting would have been reserved for the cooler hours, the soft gold of early morning, or the low crimson of evening. In the heat of midday, Carnotaurus may have sought the partial shade of rocky outcrops or the edges of sparse forests, conserving energy while the air quivered with silence. The predators of its time were not creatures of endless motion. They were patient, deliberate, moving when the world tilted just enough in their favor. To picture Carnotaurus beneath that unyielding sun is to see an animal perfectly in tune with its world. Its body reflected the heat it did not need, released the warmth it could not carry, and preserved the energy that sustained its rule. Every detail of its form, from the narrow chest to the ridged skin, spoke of balance, an art older than survival itself. In the long memory of evolution, Carnotaurus stands as a lesson written in bone and stone, that even power must learn to live with the elements that test it. In a land of fire and wind, it became what the heat required, not a victim of its climate, but a creature born from it. The plains of ancient Patagonia were never still. Across the dry horizon, great herds moved like tides of living earth, their heavy steps leaving deep impressions in the dust. The wind carried the scent of crushed plants and warm soil, mingled with the faint tremor of life itself. These herds were the pulse of the late Cretaceous, the prey that sustained every predator, including Carnotaurus, the swift shadow that ruled among them. Its world was shared with giants, the titanosaurs, the long-necked, long-tailed herbivores of the southern lands, were among the largest creatures ever to walk the earth. They grazed slowly and endlessly, their bodies towering above the scattered trees. From a distance, they looked like moving hills, their long necks sweeping from one cluster of foliage to another. Their size alone was a form of defense. Even a full-grown Carnotaurus, agile and bold, could not bring one down alone, but not all were beyond its reach. The young, the weak, and the injured strayed sometimes from the safety of the herd, and in a world of scarcity, a single mistake could draw a hunter's attention. Alongside the giants roamed the ornithopods, smaller, faster herbivores that thrived near rivers and floodplains. They were built for agility, with strong hind legs and keen senses. Some were no taller than a person, others larger, their bodies moving in quick, darting rhythms through the open fields. They relied on speed and alertness, their survival tied to the distance they could put between themselves and the predators that hunted them. For Carnotaurus, these nimble creatures offered another kind of challenge, one that matched its own precision and quickness. The ankylosaurs completed the picture of its world, their bodies covered in bony plates and spines. Though small, by comparison to their northern relatives, these living fortresses carried armor dense enough to turn aside teeth. They were not prey to be taken lightly. For a predator like Carnotaurus, one wrong move against such a creature could mean a broken tooth or worse. But in times of hunger, even danger became part of the calculus of survival. This was the stage upon which Carnotaurus lived, a world of abundance and scarcity, of giants and ghosts. Food was never guaranteed. Seasons of dryness could strip the land bare, leaving herds thinner and rivers empty. In such times, the balance between predator and prey tightened. Carnotaurus, with its slender build and sharp awareness, was not a hunter of wasteful energy. It was a strategist, conserving strength for the moments that mattered. Its hunting methods reflected that efficiency. It did not charge recklessly, nor rely on brute power as northern tyrants did. Instead, it watched. Its binocular vision, sharp and calculating, measured movement with quiet focus. When the right moment came, when a young titanosaur stumbled, or when an ornithopod ventured too far from its group, Carnotaurus acted with precision. A sudden burst, a flash of dust, the strike of jaws. Then silence. It hunted like the wind, unseen until it was too late, and gone before the dust settled. Competition shaped these instincts even further. Carnotaurus was not alone in the hunt. Other abelisaurids shared the land, heavier cousins that may have relied more on power than speed. Scavengers, too, followed from afar, smaller theropods, ancient crocodiles, and even the great flying pterosaurs that circled above, waiting for the remains. To dominate such a crowded ecosystem, Carnotaurus needed more than strength. It needed efficiency. Every motion had to count. Every hunt had to end quickly, or the desert would take more than hunger ever could. Its world demanded patience and calculation. The sun could punish a chase that lasted too long, draining the life from its muscles faster than any wound. So it learned to rely on timing rather than endurance, on single, decisive movements rather than drawn-out battles. This restraint was its advantage. While larger predators may have struggled in the dry heat, Carnotaurus could adapt, its lean body cooling faster, its need for food lower. In this way, it became the quiet master of its environment, not the strongest, but the most efficient. Its dominance was not loud or dramatic, but precise, almost mathematical. It wasted nothing. Its physiology, its hunting style, and even its place in the ecosystem reflected the same principle: survival through mastery of energy. Some researchers believe this efficiency extended even beyond hunting. Carnotaurus may have scavenged when the opportunity arose, using its speed to reach carcasses before slower rivals. Its sharp senses and wide-ranging territory would have allowed it to find food others missed. In the droughts that swept across Patagonia, such flexibility could mean the difference between life and extinction. And yet, in this harsh world, balance was constant. The herbivores continued to evolve new defenses, thicker hides, tighter herds, quicker reflexes. Each adaptation in prey shaped an answer in the predator. Evolution was not a battle, but a conversation written in bone, in motion, and in silence. Through that long exchange, Carnotaurus emerged as one of nature's most refined designs. It was not sheer might that placed it at the top, but harmony, a perfect alignment between body, climate, and need. It did not overreach. It did not waste. It existed exactly within the limits its world demanded. And so, across the burning plains of its time, Carnotaurus reigned not as a tyrant, but as a master of balance. Every step, every chase, every still moment beneath the sun spoke of an ancient wisdom written into its flesh. It was the art of survival distilled into motion, the quiet strength of a creature that thrived not by conquering its world, but by moving in rhythm with it. The world of Carnotaurus was not ruled by sound as we know it. The wind spoke through the grass, the insects sang in the heat, and the deep rumble of distant thunder rolled over the plains like the breath of the planet itself. Within this vast and sun-baked silence, communication was something deeper, quieter, heavier, carried more by presence than by noise. And yet, Carnotaurus had its own voice, one that may have echoed softly through the arid valleys of ancient Patagonia. Its skull, compact and oddly shaped, holds secrets that scientists are only beginning to understand. Inside, the bone were hollow spaces, chambers woven through the snout and jaw, connected to the airways that once ran from its nose to its lungs. These were not random gaps in the structure, but carefully arranged hollows that could have acted as resonance chambers, places where sound deepened and grew heavy. If Carnotaurus had used these chambers to produce calls, the sounds would not have been high or sharp. They would have been low and deep, rolling through the ground like the quiet tremor of an approaching storm. Such calls would not travel far through the air, but through the earth itself, felt more than heard. In the dry openness of the Cretaceous plains, such vibrations could have been a form of contact, a signal of territory, a warning, or even a greeting between individuals separated by distance. Modern animals offer glimpses of what this might have sounded like. Crocodiles hum with subsonic vibrations when defending their riverbanks. Cassowaries, those large flightless birds of the tropics, produce deep, booming calls that resonate through the forest floor. Even elephants, though from another branch of life entirely, use low-frequency rumbles to communicate across miles of savanna. It is easy to imagine Carnotaurus doing something similar, its body still as the sound moved outward in invisible waves, announcing its presence without needing to be seen. But sound was not its only language. Carnotaurus communicated through motion, through the language of its body. Every line of its form, from the tilt of its horns to the arch of its neck, carried meaning. When rivals met under the glaring sun, there may have been no immediate clash. Instead, the air would fill with subtle gestures. The predator might lift its head slightly, the horns catching the light in deliberate display. It could have bobbed its skull, slow and rhythmic, a silent message of challenge or dominance. Dust might rise as its tail swayed, stirring the air into spirals that shimmered in the heat. Each motion carried weight. In modern animals, the smallest gestures can speak louder than violence. Bulls lower their heads before a fight, their movements a dialogue of power and hesitation. Crocodiles inflate their bodies and posture along the shore, communicating rank through stillness rather than combat. Carnotaurus, with its thick neck and forward curved horns, likely shared this ancient grammar of presence, where control and restraint were the true signs of strength. The horns themselves, so often imagined as weapons, were just as likely symbols. They curved upward and slightly forward, framed by muscle and bone strong enough to endure the strain of repeated displays. In the soft light of dawn, two Carnotaurus might have faced one another, their horns tilting just enough to catch the glow. The motion was measured, deliberate, a conversation between equals testing the invisible boundaries of dominance. Even the dust beneath them became part of the ritual. When the wind died, a slow step could stir small clouds around their feet, patterns that rose and drifted like signals. The vibrations from a low rumble could make those same clouds quiver in response, turning sound and motion into one. To imagine this is to see power expressed not through chaos, but through rhythm. Each display was as much about endurance as aggression. The predator who could hold its ground the longest, could maintain the steady poise of its stance, often won without a single blow. Victory, in such encounters, was silent. It was the one that did not blink, the one that stood tallest after the echoes had faded. Carnotaurus's entire anatomy supported this kind of communication. Its thick neck, layered with muscle, allowed it to hold the head steady in long standoffs. The deep chest and strong shoulders stabilized the body, while the rigid tail anchored its balance. Even its skin, patterned and textured in complex ridges, might have caught light in ways that emphasized its form, turning each movement into a living signal. In its world, where heat shimmered and air trembled, these gestures carried farther than sound. Communication was not merely about being heard, but about being understood across the open distance. Each tilt of the head, each vibration in the ground, became a word in a quiet language as old as life itself. To us, this may seem alien, but it was a kind of poetry, a choreography of power. In the rare moments when two Carnotaurus faced one another, the world seemed to hold its breath. There would be no roar, no crashing of bodies at first, only the exchange of signals through air, dust, and posture. And in that stillness, dominance was decided. It is a strange thought that such a fearsome predator might have ruled its world not through violence alone, but through understanding, through displays measured, calculated, and restrained. Its power lay not in endless fighting, but in the silent command of its form. In the open light of the late Cretaceous, where sound rolled low and slow across the plains, Carnotaurus spoke in a language of vibration and movement. A deep rumble, a tilt of horns, the shimmer of heat around its silhouette, all parts of a wordless dialogue that kept order in a restless land. And so, even its strength became a kind of conversation, each motion deliberate, each sound deliberate, as if the predator and the world around it were speaking the same slow, patient language. Beneath every fossilized surface, beyond the shape of the skull or curve of the limb, lies another story, one too small for the naked eye to see. It rests in the fine patterns of bone, in the quiet circles that record the passage of time like rings within a tree. When scientists look into the bones of Carnotaurus under a microscope, they are not simply studying structure. They are peering into the rhythm of its life. Each bone, once alive, grew through a careful process, layers forming one upon another, year after year, marking moments of growth and pause. In Carnotaurus, these layers speak of urgency. The microscopic texture shows rapid expansion, fibers stretched thin and woven loosely, like fabric spun in haste. This was a creature that grew fast, reaching its full size in only a handful of years. Compared to the slower giants of its world, Carnotaurus lived like a spark. Its growth rings suggest that it may have reached adulthood before its 10th year, far earlier than the great herbivores it hunted. In this, it was a child of its age, a world where speed was life, and where the balance of ecosystems shifted too often for slow growth to be safe. Rapid maturation allowed it to hunt, defend, and reproduce before the world changed again. But such speed came at a cost. Fast growth usually means a shorter lifespan. The same patterns that tell of quick development also tell of fragility. The bone tissue of Carnotaurus lacks the dense reinforcement seen in long-lived creatures. Its fibers are broad and loosely arranged, filled with channels that once carried blood and minerals at a frantic pace. It was a design for efficiency, not endurance, a body that burned bright, then faded quickly. When paleontologists study thin slices of its bones under light, they see signs of constant renewal. The vascular canals, the tunnels through which life once flowed, are wide and numerous, proof of a metabolism that moved faster than that of most reptiles. This flow of life within the bone reflects an active hunter, one whose energy burned hot and brief. It suggests that Carnotaurus lived closer to the boundary between cold-blooded and warm-blooded life, a creature whose body could rise to meet the demands of the chase. Bone density adds another layer to this picture. The limbs of Carnotaurus are surprisingly light for a predator of its size. The walls of the bones are thin, the inner cavities large and open. This hollowing, much like that seen in birds, reduced weight without sacrificing strength. It gave its legs the ability to move swiftly, to shift direction, and recover balance after each strike. Every step carried both grace and tension, supported by a skeleton built not for endurance, but for precision. Even the tailbones hold secrets of movement. Their interlocking ridges and strong muscle attachments reveal that the tail did more than provide balance. It was a counterforce, a living spring that helped drive motion forward. The density of those bones changes gradually from base to tip, heavier near the hips where power was needed most, lighter toward the end where speed mattered more. This gradient is not just architecture, it is poetry written in physics. Diet, too, leaves traces in bone. The wear of muscles, the pull of tendons, and the chemical fingerprints left in the calcium all speak of what the animal ate and how often. In Carnotaurus, the evidence points to a predator that fed irregularly, feasting when prey was available and enduring long stretches of scarcity. The growth rings sometimes narrow abruptly, suggesting seasons of hunger when energy slowed and bone formation paused. Yet when abundance returned, the rings widened again, proof of recovery and resilience. Such fluctuations mirror the rhythm of its environment, the long droughts and brief, lush intervals that defined its land. Each pause in its growth marks a conversation with the climate, a record of the world's changing mood. In that sense, the bones of Carnotaurus are not only its story, but the story of the earth around it. The interior of its skull adds yet another whisper of detail. The inner ear canals, finely balanced, hint at quick head movements, perfect for targeting prey in motion. The sinuses, hollow and spacious, helped reduce weight while maintaining strength. Even the base of the skull, where muscle once anchored, reveals subtle patterns of stress and healing, signs of a life filled with motion and impact. When viewed together, these hidden clues form a portrait far more intimate than any external fossil could offer. They tell of an animal that lived quickly, moved with purpose, and aged without hesitation. A life that followed the rhythm of its heartbeat rather than the turning of the seasons. In its bones lies the echo of its nature, a creature that grew fast because the world demanded it, that lived hard because survival left no time for stillness. Every pore and channel, every ring of halted or renewed growth carries the trace of that urgency. If you could hold a fragment of its bone under the light, you would see that urgency frozen forever. It would look almost alive, a network of tunnels and threads, silent now, but once filled with blood that pulsed through a body in constant motion. The bones of Carnotaurus are more than remains. They are the quiet memory of movement, the record of a life lived in rhythm with a restless world. Through them, we glimpse not only how it moved and grew, but how it endured, a reminder that even in extinction, the traces of life continue to speak in patterns too small to fade. The final years of the Cretaceous were not marked by a single, sudden catastrophe. They began with whispers, not thunder. The world of Carnotaurus, so full of motion and life, was already unraveling long before the sky fell. The changes came quietly at first, through shifting winds, restless seas, and a planet that no longer knew stillness. South America, still isolated from the northern continents, trembled beneath forces far older than life itself. Deep within the crust, magma rose and fell in restless tides. Volcanoes erupted across distant lands, painting the horizon in smoke and ash. Some nights, the sky glowed faintly at its edges, a red haze that blurred the stars. Dust carried on the wind would settle on leaves, on rivers, on the backs of wandering herds. Each grain was a fragment of the earth's unease. For Carnotaurus, the change began in the land it ruled. The plains of Patagonia, once marked by sparse greenery and shifting rivers, grew drier still. Droughts lengthened. Streams that once carved silver lines through the dust began to vanish during the hottest seasons. When the rains did come, they came in violence, sudden floods that scoured the soil and left behind barren channels. The balance that had shaped its world for millions of years began to falter. The plants were the first to respond. Their roots, once anchored deep in steady ground, struggled to reach the lowering water tables. Forests thinned, ferns retreated into the shadows of stone. Grasses, still young in the story of Earth, spread where the soil remained loose enough to breathe. With every passing generation, the land grew barer and the air grew harsher. And as the plants changed, so too did the creatures that fed upon them. The great titanosaurs, the long-necked wanderers that had once defined the horizon, became fewer. Their herds shrank. Young ones perished in the dry seasons when the rivers failed to return. The smaller herbivores, the swift and agile runners, fared little better. With every drought, every shortage, competition sharpened. The survivors grew lean and wary, their paths more desperate. For Carnotaurus, these shifts were invisible at first. It was still the master of its range, still swift and efficient. But as the food web began to crumble, the quiet consequences reached even the apex. Prey became scarce, and with scarcity came risk. The long intervals between hunts stretched further, each chase demanding more energy than the last. Carnotaurus, built for speed and precision, could not afford waste. Every movement, every strike, became a gamble. The fossil record captures these stresses not in scenes but in patterns. The soil layers from this time show interruptions, sudden breaks in sediment, ash deposits where none had been before. Chemical traces in the bones of plants and animals reveal shifts in temperature and composition, hints of atmospheric change. Even the fossils of riverside dwellers, fish, turtles, amphibians, tell of rising salinity and stagnant water. It was as if the planet's pulse had grown irregular. Volcanic activity in distant lands, perhaps as far as what is now India and Africa, sent vast amounts of carbon and sulfur into the air. The skies would have been thick with haze, dimming sunlight and altering rainfall. The global climate began to tilt, swinging unpredictably between heat and chill. In some regions, fires burned for weeks. In others, strange cold winds swept through valleys that had never known frost. Life persisted, but it was beginning to strain under the weight of imbalance. For isolated continents like South America, these global tremors were amplified. Cut off from migration routes that connected other lands, species here had nowhere to flee when ecosystems faltered. What was once an evolutionary advantage, isolation, became a quiet trap. Carnotaurus and its kin were bound to the fate of their land, their lives woven into the unraveling fabric of the southern world. The signs of collapse were subtle, but relentless. Nesting grounds grew less reliable, forcing animals to move farther each year. The air, rich in dust and ash, altered plant growth and reduced oxygen near the surface. Even the light may have changed, the sun dimmer, its warmth softer and redder through the haze. The once stable patterns of day and season became uncertain. It is tempting to think of the end as a single instant, a fireball, a shock, a sudden silence, but the truth is gentler, more haunting. The end had already begun, long before that moment. The world was weakening in increments, its rhythms slowly breaking apart. For millions of years, life had adapted to every challenge Earth had offered, but now the challenges were arriving faster than evolution could answer. For Carnotaurus, each generation was born into a slightly harsher world. Each season brought longer droughts, less prey, and greater struggle. Yet still it endured, for endurance was written into its bones. Its kind had survived countless cycles of change, countless reshaping of land and climate. It could not have known that this one would be the last. The moment the world began to end was not marked by destruction, but by stillness, a stillness that crept into the rivers, the air, and the hearts of living things. It was a long, quiet fading, the kind that begins with whispers and ends, eventually, in silence. And somewhere in the dry plains of late Cretaceous Patagonia, Carnotaurus still moved through that silence. It hunted as it always had. It breathed the thinning air. It watched the horizon shimmer under skies that were changing color. The world around it was already falling apart, yet it kept moving, a symbol of life's stubborn persistence against the slow unraveling of time. It began like any other morning. The sun rose over the dry plains of Patagonia, spilling its golden light across the cracked earth. The air shimmered faintly, already heavy with heat. Far in the distance, herds of herbivores moved slowly across the horizon, kicking up trails of dust that floated and faded in the wind. The world was still alive, still full of motion and sound, the rhythmic steps of animals, the faint hum of insects, the whisper of wind through sparse vegetation. But somewhere high above the blue sky, beyond the reach of clouds or wind, something had already changed. A rock larger than a mountain was falling. It had traveled for millions of years through the emptiness of space, silent and unthinking. And now it was only hours away. The world below could not sense it. The air was calm. Carnotaurus, moving through its territory, would have felt no warning. It would have known hunger, heat, thirst, the same familiar burdens of life. Perhaps it stalked a small herd that morning, muscles shifting smoothly beneath its scaled skin. Perhaps it paused in the shadow of a dry ravine, its flanks rising and falling with each steady breath. All the while, far beyond its senses, the final event in Earth's Cretaceous story was already on its way. When scientists today simulate those final moments, the picture they paint is both immense and intimate. The asteroid struck near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, thousands of kilometers north of where Carnotaurus lived, yet even that great distance offered no refuge. Within minutes, shock waves began to circle the planet, racing through the air faster than sound. Earth itself shuddered, its crust bending like a drumskin under the force of impact. In Patagonia, the first sign would not have been light, but motion. The ground trembled. Small stones rolled from dry slopes. Birds, the last of the dinosaurs that could fly, startled into the air in a sudden chorus of wings. The tremors grew, slow at first, then rhythmic, deep, like the heartbeat of something vast beneath the soil. Carnotaurus would have lifted its head, sensing vibrations through the pads of its feet. It may have looked to the horizon, where the air began to ripple. Trees swayed in patterns not made by wind. The calls of distant animals faltered, replaced by a strange stillness. Then came the light. Far to the north, over the curve of the earth, the impact had released an energy greater than all the volcanoes, all the storms, all the fires of its age combined. A single flash, brighter than 1,000 suns, had erupted over the ocean, visible even from Patagonia. The sky grew pale and unfamiliar, colors bleeding into one another, gold, silver, and white. Minutes later came the heat. Air, once still and dry, became a wave of fire. Wind screamed across the plains, thick with particles thrown into the sky by the impact. The sunlight grew harsher, then dimmer, as dust began to rise and fall. Leaves turned to ash. The air shimmered not with warmth but with burning. Carnotaurus, built for motion and survival, could do nothing against the sky itself. The instincts that had carried it through drought and famine, through rivalry and hunt, were powerless now. Its muscles, strong and sure, could not outrun the light or the waves of heat that followed. Yet before the true darkness came, there would have been a strange and haunting calm. The first fires burned along the horizon, painting the world in red and orange. The air thickened with silence, broken only by the crackle of burning vegetation. Every creature still standing would have paused, unsure whether to flee or hide. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. In that silence, the sensory world of Carnotaurus reached its end. The ground beneath it was warm, pulsing faintly from aftershocks that traveled through the rock. The air carried the metallic scent of dust and ozone. Its nostrils, so finely tuned to trace the faintest smell of prey, now filled with the taste of earth. Light flickered through the smoke, glinting against the scales that had once shimmered beneath the sun. Then the world began to fade. The fires spread until night itself was forced to retreat. The smoke that rose into the upper atmosphere began to block the light of the sun, turning day into a slow twilight. Temperatures plummeted. Rain began to fall, not cool, but thick and dark, heavy with ash and acid. The impact had shattered the rhythm of life, and yet, for a few final hours, the creatures of Patagonia continued to move as they always had. Carnotaurus still breathed, its heart still beat, its instincts, blind to the scale of what had happened, still urged it onward. The earth was dying, but it did not die all at once. As the fires dimmed and the sky grew strange, the last light touched the land, not golden now, but gray and red, filtered through veils of dust. The great plains that had once echoed with the sound of footsteps fell quiet, and there, in that silence, Carnotaurus vanished into history, not in a single heartbeat, but in a fading, gradual surrender. The world it had ruled for millions of years folded gently around it, layer by layer, turning from sound to stillness, from light to shadow. By the time the last tremors settled, and the air cooled enough for the dust to drift back to the ground, its age was over. The reign of the horned predator ended not in battle, but in silence. A silence so vast that it carried across time, through stone and memory, to reach us now. The fire that had begun in the sky did not end quickly. For days after the asteroid struck, the world continued to burn. Trees smoldered in silence. Ash drifted across continents like gray snow. The air shimmered with heat by day and glowed faintly by night, lit by the scattered embers of a planet trying to breathe through its own destruction. The Earth's atmosphere had changed almost instantly. The asteroid's impact had thrown dust, rock, and vapor high into the sky, so high that the upper layers of the atmosphere became a thick veil of particles. Sunlight, once golden and steady, could barely reach the surface. Where there had once been light, there was now a dim, copper haze. The world grew darker, colder, and quieter. For a time, fire replaced sunlight. Across what had once been lush forests, flames spread faster than any storm. The debris from the impact, heated as it fell back through the atmosphere, ignited everything it touched. Even the soil, dry and cracked, burned with a dull orange glow. Rivers steamed and shrank, their surfaces filmed with soot. The smell of burning plant life, once fragrant and green, turned sharp and metallic. In Patagonia, where Carnotaurus had once ruled, the sky would have turned to ash gray within days. The winds that once carried the scent of rain now carried the taste of sulfur and dust. Acid rain began to fall, formed when chemicals released from the impact mixed with the water in the clouds. Each drop stung and stripped color from the land, eating away at leaves, bark, and even bone. The air grew colder. After the first fiery weeks, the sunlight that had set the world aflame could no longer reach the ground. The dust clouds that circled the earth acted like a shield, reflecting light back into space. Within months, global temperatures began to plummet. The tropical warmth that had filled the Cretaceous world faded, replaced by chill winds that blew from the poles. For the creatures that had survived the fires, this cold was the next trial. The plants that had once anchored the food web could not grow in the dim light. Leaves turned brittle and fell. The ferns that had covered the ground with green gave way to bare soil. Without plants, the herbivores weakened. The great titanosaurs that had once thundered across the plains grew thin, their massive bodies unable to find enough to sustain them. And as the herbivores faltered, so too did their hunters. Carnotaurus had once been the master of motion, a predator that thrived in open land, chasing prey through the shimmering heat of the southern plains. But now there was no movement left to chase. The sound of footsteps in the distance grew rare. The plains fell silent, the wind carrying only the hiss of dust across empty ground. The last of the Carnotaurus may have walked through a landscape that no longer recognized itself. The rivers were low and lined with ash. The sky never brightened. Even the sound of insects, that constant background of life, had faded. Its body, made for heat and speed, was not built for the cold that now crept across the land. Each breath it drew was heavy, each step slower than the one before. It is unlikely that Carnotaurus died in the impact itself. Patagonia lay too far from the center of the explosion. No shock wave reached it strong enough to crush or burn it instantly. Instead, its death came slowly, carried by the collapse of the world around it. It was not the asteroid that ended its reign, but hunger, cold, and the unraveling of an ecosystem that could no longer hold its shape. For months, perhaps even years, pockets of life clung to survival. Some plants endured in sheltered valleys. Some small reptiles and birds adapted to the new world, feeding on what remained. But for the large creatures, there was no way forward. They needed a world that no longer existed, a world of warmth, abundance, and sunlight. The fossils tell this story quietly. In the rock layers after the impact, diversity vanishes. The traces of great animals disappear, replaced by the fine imprints of ferns and the bones of small survivors. The line between the age of giants and what came after is thin, no wider than a single band of clay that circles the globe. That clay holds the chemical fingerprints of the asteroid's impact, a layer that marks the end of one chapter and the fragile beginning of another. In that thin band, there is no direct record of Carnotaurus's final breath, but its silence is written in what follows, in the absence of its prints, in the stillness of the world it once ruled. The predator that had sprinted across the plains of Patagonia, that had thrived through heat and drought, was undone not by weakness, but by change too swift and too vast to escape. When the skies finally began to clear, years later, the world that emerged was new. The air was colder, the forests smaller, the seas higher. The age of reptiles had passed, and a new rhythm of life began to form from what had survived. The world was reborn, but it was quieter, humbler. Carnotaurus, the horned predator of the dying world, left behind only bones and impressions of its skin, fragments of motion turned to stone. It had lived through fire and drought, through dominance and isolation, only to meet an ending no strength could overcome. And yet, in that ending, there was continuity. The life that followed, shaped by the silence it left behind, carried traces of its story forward, in the balance of speed and precision, in the patterns of adaptation that would return again and again in new forms. The world had ended, but life did not. It simply took a breath, paused, and began again in the quiet. Time has a way of hiding things gently. The world that Carnotaurus once ruled had long been buried beneath layers of soil and silence, folded into the slow geology of the earth. For millions of years, its bones slept beneath the dry plains of Patagonia, sealed beneath dust and stone, while rivers came and went and mountains rose around it. What had once walked with power and motion was now nothing more than a memory written in rock. And yet, even memory can be uncovered. In the year 1984, a team of paleontologists, led by Jose Bonaparte, set out to explore a stretch of land in southern Argentina, a region where the wind never stopped moving and the ground carried whispers of ancient life. The place was barren, open, and golden under the sun, but to trained eyes it was alive with possibility. The surface was scattered with fragments of fossilized bone, each one a clue, each one a voice calling softly from another time. Days under the heat blurred together. The work was slow and quiet, full of patience. The scientists would kneel for hours in the dust, brushing away soil with soft tools, marking each discovery by hand. Fossils are fragile things, they cannot be rushed. Every layer of sand and rock must be peeled away as carefully as the turning of a delicate page. Then, one morning, a shape began to emerge from the ground, not a scattered bone or a single fragment, but something larger. The curve of a rib, the edge of a jaw, the unmistakable outline of a skull. Piece by piece, the team uncovered what would become one of the most complete theropod skeletons ever found in the southern hemisphere. At first, it was the skull that drew their attention. It was unlike anything they had seen. Short, deep, and crowned with two thick horns above the eyes. It looked powerful, compact, and oddly elegant. The creature's proportions seemed impossible. The arms were absurdly small, the legs long and narrow, the tail thick and muscular. The bones spoke of a predator built for motion, but sculpted in ways that defied expectation. Even before the fossils were lifted from the ground, whispers began to spread among the scientists. This was not an ordinary predator. This was something new. But the true wonder was yet to be revealed. As the team continued to excavate, they noticed something unusual in the surrounding rock, a texture pressed into the sediment, fine and delicate, almost like a pattern of scales. Such impressions were rare. Fossilized skin is among the most fragile records nature can preserve. In most cases, it disappears long before the bone is even exposed. But here, along the sides of the fossilized body, the imprint of skin had been sealed perfectly by time. When the discovery became clear, the team grew silent. They had found not only the bones of Carnotaurus, but the texture of its very flesh, the surface of a creature that had lived and breathed 70 million years ago. Under the thin layer of rock, the scales appeared as small, raised polygons, interrupted by rows of larger, conical bumps known as scutes. The detail was astonishing. It was as if time itself had paused in mid-breath and preserved the pattern of a life that should have vanished forever. The realization changed everything. Until then, the image of dinosaurs had been dominated by imagination, skin imagined smooth or wrinkled, colors guessed at, muscles shaped by artistic intuition more than evidence. But here was something real. For the first time, paleontologists could see the texture of a large theropod's skin exactly as it had been. They could trace the patterns, measure the bumps, and imagine how light might have played across its surface as it moved through the ancient sun. It was a revelation. The fossil was carefully extracted, encased in plaster jackets to protect it from the long journey out of the field. Each piece was labeled and documented, every fragment mapped and recorded. The process took weeks. Even the smallest section of skin was treated like a treasure, wrapped gently in layers of padding to keep it safe. When the fossils finally arrived at the museum, the reconstruction began, an even slower and more delicate process than excavation. In the laboratory, scientists cleaned away the remaining dust with brushes finer than a whisper. Each bone was examined, measured, and reassembled in three-dimensional models. The skull, heavy with muscle attachments and crowned with its two forward-pointing horns, was reconstructed first. Then the long legs, the narrow chest, and the deep tail, and finally, the pattern of the skin, not imagined, but traced directly from the fossil itself. For the first time, humanity could see Carnotaurus not as a skeleton, but as a living form. Its body was lean and sculpted for motion. Its surface was not smooth, but alive with texture, ridged, armored, and marked with patterns that spoke of strength and adaptation. It was not the dull gray creature of early depictions, but something far more complex, far more vivid. The discovery of the skin impressions changed paleontology forever. It showed that dinosaurs were not crude primitive monsters, but creatures of remarkable design and biological sophistication. They were dynamic, specialized, and often beautiful in ways that the world had long forgotten. Carnotaurus became a symbol of this new understanding, the moment when science began to see dinosaurs not as relics of a lost world, but as living animals with real presence, color, and texture. Its discovery bridged imagination and reality, connecting the ancient and the modern in a single, silent imprint left in stone. And somewhere within that fossilized skin, preserved through millions of years, lies a reminder of how fragile life's record can be. One creature's final rest became humanity's rediscovery, a quiet reunion between two distant ages, separated by time but joined through curiosity and wonder. The discovery of Carnotaurus's skin did more than reveal the texture of a single creature. It reshaped the way science and imagination saw an entire age. For more than a century, dinosaurs had been pictured as gray, leathery giants, powerful, yes, but simple, almost lifeless in color and detail. The world imagined them as creatures of brute force, not grace or complexity. But when the light first touched the fossilized skin of Carnotaurus, that image began to dissolve. Under the microscope, the stone surface revealed patterns that no artist had invented. Small, irregular scales covered the body, each one slightly raised, like the surface of dried river clay. Along the flanks and back ran larger bumps, conical and arranged in subtle rows. These were not random textures. They spoke of function, of purpose, of adaptation, written into the surface of life. For the first time, scientists could see how a large theropod truly looked, not imagined or sculpted from guesswork, but real, preserved with the patience of 70 million years. Before Carnotaurus, few dinosaurs had ever been found with skin impressions this complete. Bits and fragments had appeared elsewhere in the fossil record, a tail print here, a patch of hide there, but never something that covered nearly the entire body. In those small, petrified patterns, paleontologists saw the proof that dinosaurs were not covered in smooth scales like lizards, nor were they featureless, leathery beasts. Their bodies were intricate mosaics of texture and detail. The arrangement of those scales told more than a story of beauty. It revealed clues about survival. The large bumps, called scutes, likely acted as armor, shielding the sides and back from injury during fights or collisions. Their spacing suggested strength without heaviness, a way to reinforce the body while keeping it light enough for speed. Beneath them, smaller scales interlocked to form a flexible skin that could twist, stretch, and move with every step. Carnotaurus was not wrapped in a dull shell, but clothed in a living pattern of protection and grace. And then came the deeper question, color. Though fossils do not preserve color directly, the arrangement and shape of the skin's surface gave scientists hints. In many living animals, similar textures help manage light and temperature. Rough surfaces scatter heat, while patterns of raised and smooth areas create shadows that can disrupt outlines, blending the animal into its environment. It was likely that Carnotaurus's skin was not flat or monotone, but varied in tone and shade, perhaps in earthy reds and browns that matched the dusty plains it walked upon. The scutes, arranged in rows along its body, may even have caught the light differently as it moved, turning motion into shimmer. Some researchers have imagined faint mottling across its flanks or subtle stripes, echoes of camouflage patterns still found in large predators today. The truth may never be fully known, but what matters most is what it changed. The realization that dinosaurs were not colorless relics. They were living, breathing organisms shaped by light, heat, and movement, their appearance as dynamic as their world. This revelation began to ripple outward. If Carnotaurus had such detailed skin, what of the others? What of the hadrosaurs, whose skin impressions later revealed fine pebbled scales and even patterns of pigmentation? What of the smaller predators, some of which would later be found with traces of feathers? Piece by piece, paleontology began to see that the age of dinosaurs had been far from drab. It had been vibrant, filled with the complexity and variety we see in modern ecosystems. The surface of Carnotaurus's body also offered insight into how dinosaurs managed the heat of their environments. The late Cretaceous was a time of extremes, long droughts, intense sunlight, and shifting temperatures. The pattern of scales may have helped Carnotaurus regulate its body temperature, reflecting sunlight in some areas while trapping warmth in others. The ridged texture of its hide could have allowed air to circulate across the skin, cooling it as it moved. Its armor was not only for defense, but for balance between light and shadow, between heat and motion. With every study, the image of dinosaurs grew sharper, more alive. They were no longer seen as sluggish, cold-blooded reptiles, but as creatures with active metabolisms and intricate adaptations. Their skin was not an afterthought, but an essential part of their biology, a canvas of survival, written in texture and tone. The fossils of Carnotaurus bridged a gap that had long divided science and imagination. They gave shape to questions that artists had painted for generations, grounding vision in evidence. When the first reconstructions were made, they no longer looked like smooth-skinned monsters. Instead, they looked like athletes of evolution, sculpted, textured, and radiant with life. Through this single fossil, the way we see dinosaurs changed forever. No longer ghosts of prehistory, they became real animals once more, with scales that caught the light, muscles that moved beneath them, and bodies that spoke of heat and endurance. The lesson of Carnotaurus's skin reached beyond its own species. It reminded us that every surface of life, no matter how small, holds a story. The texture of a scale can tell of battles survived. The pattern of a ridge can reveal a climate endured. The impression of skin, pressed into stone for millions of years, can resurrect not just an animal, but an entire world. In the stillness of the museum light, that ancient skin continues to glow softly, each scale a window into the past. It is more than fossilized hide. It is a reminder of how the earth remembers, not in words or images, but in texture, in the quiet geometry of what once lived, and what, through patience, it lets us see again. In the quiet halls of modern science, Carnotaurus walks again, not in bone or flesh, but in numbers, light, and simulation. Computers hum softly where ancient winds once carried its scent. Data replaces dust, equations replace footprints, and through this new craft of digital resurrection, scientists have begun to answer one of the oldest questions written in its bones. How did a creature of such weight move with such grace? To understand this, paleontologists and biomechanical engineers joined forces, blending anatomy with physics. The fossil itself became a blueprint, every ridge and socket measured with precision, every curve scanned in 3 dimensions. The skull, the vertebrae, the long hind limbs, and the deep, muscular tail Each part was fed into a model that could test the laws of motion against the limits of biology. At first glance, Carnotaurus seemed too heavy, too solid to move as swiftly as the evidence suggested. It was nearly 2 tons of living muscle and bone, its body built low and narrow, its legs long and lean, yet its proportions whispered of speed. The long lower legs and the powerful upper thighs suggested an animal made for sudden bursts of motion, not endurance. It was not the kind of predator that chased its prey for miles. It was one that waited, then exploded forward in a single, unstoppable instant. The digital reconstructions began by recreating how each joint could move. Engineers mapped the angles of motion, how far each limb could flex before bone met bone, how muscles would have stretched and recoiled with each step. They modeled the pull of tendons and the twist of the spine, building not just a shape, but a system, a living machine of muscle, leverage, and balance. The results astonished even those who knew the animal best. Simulations showed that Carnotaurus could have sprinted with remarkable acceleration. Its body was built not for sheer size, like the northern tyrannosaurs, but for efficiency. Its bones were light but strong, its center of gravity low and stable. The tail, long and thick, was more than a counterweight. It was a dynamic lever, storing and releasing energy with every stride. Inside its tail vertebrae, scientists found deep grooves where muscles once anchored. These muscles, known as caudofemoralis, were massive, stretching from the tail to the legs. In life, they would have worked like coiled springs. As the tail swung forward, it pulled on the legs, driving them backward in powerful kicks. This single motion, repeated again and again, could propel the predator with astonishing force. The balance of the body was equally elegant. Each step required perfect timing between the thrust of the legs and the motion of the tail. If the tail swung too far or too fast, it would have thrown the animal off balance. If it lagged behind, momentum would falter. But in the digital model, everything worked in harmony, a rhythm of motion so fluid it seemed almost choreographed. Carnotaurus did not run awkwardly like a lumbering beast. It sprinted like an engineered miracle of evolution. The physics behind this motion were staggering. At full speed, the pressure on its leg bones would have been immense, equal to several times its body weight. Yet the shape of those bones distributed stress perfectly, channeling force through arches of bone that acted like the supports of a bridge. The femur, short and thick, carried the main load, while the shin bone extended long and narrow, maximizing stride without overburdening the frame. The muscles along its thighs, reconstructed through comparison with modern reptiles and birds, were among the most powerful in any known predator of its size. Even the skin played a role. The surface texture, with its ridges and scutes, may have reduced drag as air flowed across its body, helping it maintain speed without overheating. Its narrow chest and flattened sides reduced wind resistance. Everything about its body, from the tilt of the skull to the curve of the spine, pointed toward a single goal: acceleration. Yet within this perfection, there was fragility. The same design that made it swift also limited it. Carnotaurus could not sustain long pursuits. Its movements demanded bursts of energy so intense that they could only be maintained for moments. In that brief span, however, it could close the distance between hunter and prey faster than almost any predator of its time. Through biomechanical modeling, scientists found a truth that echoed what nature had always known. Speed is not about raw strength, but about balance, the harmony between weight, muscle, and motion. Carnotaurus achieved that balance with a precision that seemed almost deliberate. Its body was tuned like an instrument, every line and lever working together to produce motion that defied expectation. In the laboratories where these reconstructions play out, digital Carnotaurus now moves again. On the screens, It lowers its head, muscles tensing beneath simulated skin. The tail flexes, the legs push against an invisible ground. For a brief moment, millions of years vanish, and motion returns to bone. The predator sprints forward in silence, captured not by film or imagination, but by the mathematics of life itself. Watching these simulations, one cannot help but feel a quiet admiration, not for the technology, but for the creature it reveals. Evolution, through time and pressure, had built something so improbable that even in our most advanced models, we are only beginning to understand it. Carnotaurus was not just fast, it was a masterpiece of natural engineering, a design balanced between power and precision, between the heavy certainty of mass and the fleeting beauty of motion. In every muscle reconstructed, in every digital stride recreated, there is the echo of what the Earth once achieved, the impossible made real, if only for a moment in time. Long after Carnotaurus had vanished from the world, its bones remained asleep beneath layers of stone, waiting for minds far in the future to rediscover what its body had once mastered, the art of motion. In life, it had been a paradox of strength and lightness, a creature both heavy and swift, made to run in bursts across the plains of ancient Patagonia. Today, scientists study its fossilized form the way engineers study blueprints, comparing it to the living masters of motion that walk, fly, and sprint across the earth. When researchers examine the skeleton of Carnotaurus beside those of modern animals, a quiet revelation appears. The long legs, narrow chest, and streamlined body resemble those of creatures built for running, not lumbering giants, but graceful sprinters. The bones of ostriches, cheetahs, and even certain birds echo the same principles. Evolution, in different ages and species, had found the same elegant solutions to the same ancient problem: how to move fast while carrying weight. The ostrich, for example, shares an unexpected kinship with Carnotaurus. Both stand tall on long, muscular legs with elongated shins and tendons that act like springs. Each step taken by an ostrich stores energy as the leg bends, then releases it in the next stride, propelling the bird forward with little effort. In simulations, scientists believe Carnotaurus did something similar. Its long shin bones and powerful tail work together to recycle energy with every step, a living system of levers and pulleys crafted by natural design. In modern ostriches, the balance between speed and control is delicate. Too much power without stability leads to collapse. Too much weight on the body slows the stride. Carnotaurus seemed to understand this balance instinctively. Its deep tail counterbalanced its body, keeping its movements centered. Its chest, narrow and compact, reduced air resistance as it ran. It did not gallop or bound like mammals. It glided through motion in smooth, rhythmic strides, each one measured and exact. When the movements of Carnotaurus are compared to the cheetah, another layer of understanding emerges. The cheetah, the fastest land animal alive today, uses a flexible spine that bends with each stride, allowing its legs to extend farther. Carnotaurus lacked this flexibility. Its spine was rigid, built for stability rather than bending. Yet in its rigidity lay a different kind of efficiency. Instead of bending, Carnotaurus transferred its power through rotation. Its hips and tail twisted slightly with each stride, using momentum rather than elasticity to extend its reach. It was not a sprinter of long distances, but a master of explosive motion, a predator that could close space between itself and its prey in a heartbeat. The comparison grows even more fascinating when we look to birds. Birds, though far removed from the ancient abelisaurs, inherited some of the same skeletal traits that once made Carnotaurus so efficient. Their hollow bones, their lightweight frames, and their long leg tendons all speak of the same evolutionary theme: motion refined by necessity. Every flight, Every sprint, every leap in the animal kingdom is a quiet echo of the same ancient rhythm, the desire of life to move faster, farther, more efficiently. Through this lens, Carnotaurus becomes more than a relic of the past. It becomes one of nature's first great experiments in engineering speed within the limits of mass. To move a 2-ton body across land requires precision, far beyond brute strength. It requires an understanding of physics written into flesh, of how to store energy, balance motion, and release power without losing control. Carnotaurus achieved this balance long before the first mammals evolved similar designs. Modern biomechanical studies have confirmed this hidden mastery. When scientists model the forces acting on its legs, they find that each stride would have generated enough power to lift and propel its body forward with surprising efficiency. The muscles that ran from its tail to its thighs acted like engines, pushing against the ground while keeping its center steady. The energy flowed through its body the way wind flows through a bird's wings, smooth, unbroken, and perfectly distributed. In the natural world, evolution often repeats its best ideas. It tries, refines, and perfects them across eras. Carnotaurus represents one of those early trials, a moment when evolution first began shaping predators not for brute force, but for precision. Later, birds would refine that design into flight and mammals into sprinting. But in this ancient predator, the experiment was already well underway. Its speed was not constant, but situational. It would not have chased prey across great distances. Instead, it waited for the right moment, a sudden burst of movement, a calculated lunge, an eruption of stored energy. The hunt, for Carnotaurus, was less a pursuit than a performance of timing. Its speed was the punctuation mark in a sentence, written in silence and patience. When paleontologists run their simulations today, the results still feel astonishing. The digital Carnotaurus accelerates with power and grace, its limbs striking the ground in perfect rhythm. The numbers confirm what the bones have always hinted, that this was one of the most efficient runners of its time, not the fastest by pure measure, but among the most finely tuned. The science of speed reveals something deeper about life itself. Every creature that runs, flies, or swims must balance the same equation between energy and survival. Carnotaurus solved it in its own way, sculpted by the same invisible hand that would later give rise to the gazelle's leap and the falcon's dive. It was not only a predator of flesh, but a masterpiece of motion, a reminder that evolution, in every age, seeks elegance as much as power. And in its bones, now silent but measured with the precision of light and mathematics, that ancient grace still lingers, the memory of a sprint that once shook the earth, now preserved forever in the quiet rhythm of science. In the stillness of Patagonia, time once held the bones of Carnotaurus in its quiet grip. For millions of years, they rested beneath layers of dust and volcanic ash, undisturbed except by the slow pressure of the earth itself. Then, one day in 1984, a team of paleontologists brushed the dirt from something that shimmered like bone. What they uncovered was more than a skeleton. It was a story written in stone, one that would soon travel across oceans and generations. The journey of a fossil begins long before it is displayed beneath the soft lights of a museum. It begins in the field, where discovery meets patience. After the first bones of Carnotaurus emerged, the scientists worked carefully, knowing how easily time's record could crumble. Each fragment of earth surrounding the fossil was chipped away with fine tools. Every stroke of a brush revealed another clue, another connection between what once lived and what remains. The skeleton lay curled in the red soil, nearly complete, as if frozen mid-step. Around it, the land was dry and wind-carved, the same landscape that had once been its home. To remove it, The team had to work slowly, cutting wide trenches around the fossilized frame. The exposed bones were wrapped in layers of wet paper, then covered in strips of plaster soaked in water. When the plaster hardened, it formed a shell, a fragile creature protected within another layer of rock and care. Each section of the skeleton was lifted with ropes and metal braces, carried by hand and machine through the heat of the desert. The air was still, the sound of wind mixing with the murmur of work. Every person there knew they were holding something rare, something that had not felt sunlight in 70 million years. The bones that had once moved through life now moved again, only this time in silence. The fossil traveled hundreds of kilometers from the field to a research laboratory. Once there, the plaster was removed with patience and precision. Under the steady hands of preparators, stone gave way to bone, and the creature's form began to emerge once more. The air filled with the sound of fine metal scraping against rock. Grain by grain, the sediment was lifted away, revealing the smooth surfaces and ridges that had once been alive. Sometimes, in the preparation room, dust hung in the light like a memory. Scientists spoke in low tones, measuring, sketching, documenting. Each bone was catalogued, photographed, and stabilized with a thin resin to prevent cracking. Even the smallest fragment was given attention, for in paleontology, no detail is too small to matter. The surface of the skull, for instance, revealed faint impressions of skin, tiny patterns of scales that transformed the fossil from a relic into a vivid record of life. After months of careful work, the skeleton was strong enough to be studied and reconstructed. Engineers and artists worked together to piece it back into shape. The bones were cast in, lightweight replicas to preserve the originals, allowing the full form to be mounted upright. The tail curved gently, the head tilted forward, and for the first time since its death, Carnotaurus stood again, not in flesh and motion, but in memory and presence. When the reconstruction was complete, it was transported to a museum, where it would find its new home among glass cases and quiet corridors. Here, in the calm light of exhibition halls, it no longer hunted or fought for survival. Instead, it told its story to those who stood before it, children gazing upward, scientists tracing lines with their eyes, dreamers imagining the world that came before. The fossil had traveled far, from soil to stone, from silence to voice. Yet even in its stillness, it continued to live a kind of second life. It carried information hidden in every curve and pore, the growth patterns in its bones, the wear of its teeth, the imprint of its skin. Each was a message from the deep past, written in a language of mineral and memory. Fossils like Carnotaurus are not just bones turned to stone, they are time capsules, preserving the intersection of biology and geology, of life and decay. In them, we see the patience of Earth itself, recording everything it witnesses. The minerals that replace the bone become storytellers, holding molecules of ancient rivers, breaths of vanished air, the weight of extinct forests. As scientists studied the fossil, they realized how rare it truly was. Few dinosaurs had been preserved with such completeness, and fewer still with traces of skin intact. It was as if time itself had chosen to keep this one safe, to guard it as a reminder of what life can achieve before it fades. Now, under the careful light of its display, Carnotaurus rests once more, not buried, but remembered. The people who visit may see only bone and shadow, but within that silence lies the rhythm of an ancient heartbeat. Its journey from dust to discovery, from isolation to wonder, is the continuation of the same story written into the Earth's crust, the story of life enduring through change, of motion preserved in stillness, and in that stillness, something beautiful happens. The line between past and present softens. A creature that lived and died 70 million years ago finds a new kind of existence, not in the wild, but in the mind. Each visitor who pauses before its form becomes part of the fossil's long voyage, adding one more layer to its story, one more moment to the memory of a world that once breathed beneath a hotter, stranger sun. The bones of Carnotaurus tell the story of the hunter, but the dust that once surrounded them tells the story of the world. When paleontologists finished lifting the skeleton from the earth, they did not stop with the bones. They collected the soil, the thin layers of rock pressed around it, the fragments of stone that once held shape but had long since turned to powder. In those small pieces lay a record far older and deeper than the skeleton itself. The dust held the whispers of an entire vanished landscape. Each grain of sediment is a tiny time capsule. It remembers even when memory itself has faded. Under the microscope, the beige and rust-colored grains begin to reveal their secrets: flecks of volcanic glass, crystals formed from ancient ash, the remains of clay washed down by a long-vanished river. Together, they tell scientists what the land of Patagonia was like when Carnotaurus still walked upon it. It was not just rock and bone, it was a place of heat, of drought, of fleeting rain that cut channels through red soil and dried again beneath a merciless sun. Within that fine sediment, scientists found the traces of other lives, each one a thread in the same tapestry. Fossilized pollen grains, too small to see with the naked eye, appeared like intricate sculptures of geometry and color. Some came from flowering plants, early ancestors of those that now cover modern plains. Others came from hardy conifers that once clung to life in scattered groves. These pollen grains, still trapped within the stone, showed that even in the harshness of the late Cretaceous, green life persisted. It pushed through the dry earth, sprouting after brief rains, feeding the small herbivores that fed the larger ones. Tiny spores of ancient ferns were found too, curled like sleeping dust motes in the rock. Their presence told of shaded hollows, perhaps along seasonal streams where moisture lingered longest. In those brief oases, life gathered: insects, lizards, perhaps even young dinosaurs seeking refuge from the glare of the open plains. These fragments, invisible to the eye, drew the outline of an ecosystem once full of motion and sound. Mixed among them were the shells of microorganisms that had once lived in shallow pools and temporary lakes. They were simple, single-celled beings, encased in calcium or silica, their bodies now reduced to faint impressions. Yet they told scientists how the water once rose and fell, how minerals settled, and how the chemistry of the ancient air shaped the land. Even in something as small as a microfossil, the rhythm of a vanished climate can be heard. By studying the dust that cradled Carnotaurus, paleontologists could measure the breadth of its world, the ratio of certain minerals, the alignment of crystals, the color of the rock, all pointed to a land that had once been both fertile and fragile. Volcanic eruptions had scattered ash across the plains, feeding the soil with nutrients even as they poisoned the air. Rivers flowed for a season, then vanished into cracks, leaving behind layers of silt that hardened into stone. Over it all, the winds carried seeds and dust, weaving life and death together into one slow, cyclical pattern. Each microscopic discovery added a new texture to the picture. The dust showed that Carnotaurus had not lived in isolation. It had shared its world with herds of grazing titanosaurs, with small mammals nesting in burrows, with insects that hummed above ancient flowers. The land it hunted across was more than barren heat. It was alive with the quiet resilience of things that endure. In one thin layer of rock, scientists even found traces of charcoal, blackened remnants of plant matter burned in prehistoric fires. Those fires, likely sparked by lightning, tell of long, dry seasons when the land cracked open under the weight of the sun. After the flames passed, green life returned, as it always does, sprouting anew from ash. Such cycles shaped the very world Carnotaurus ruled, its speed and precision honed in a landscape that demanded adaptation to survive. To the untrained eye, the dust looks like nothing more than dirt, a smear of color on a rock, but under magnification, it transforms into a gallery of patterns and shapes, each one distinct, each one a fragment of memory. Scientists see in those grains a record of wind, rain, and silence. They read them like letters from an ancient earth. When pieced together, these traces fill the silence between bones. The pollen explains what the air once smelled like. The volcanic ash tells of thunder in the distance. The fine silt reveals the path of a stream where small creatures drank and fled. Through these details, the landscape becomes real again, not an empty desert, but a living stage upon which Carnotaurus moved with purpose and grace. It is easy to think of fossils as the main characters of prehistory and the dust as their backdrop, but in truth, the dust is what gives the story meaning. It carries the echoes of all that surrounded them, the sounds of wind across dry plains, the shimmer of heat above the horizon, the scent of rain that rarely came. Even now, scientists handle those grains with reverence. They know that within them lies the oldest kind of knowledge, written not in words or images, but in layers of minerals and memory. The dust remembers what life forgets. It preserves the rhythm of days, too ancient for counting. In the quiet of the laboratory, under the glow of magnified light, those stories come alive again. Each grain is a world, each fragment a reminder that even the smallest pieces of earth hold the memory of life entire. And so, through dust and bone alike, the world of Carnotaurus continues to speak, softly, endlessly, across the silence of time. In the halls of museums and laboratories across the world, Carnotaurus no longer hunts or runs. Instead, it teaches. Its bones, once buried in silence, now whisper lessons to those who listen carefully about movement, adaptation, and the artistry of evolution. Though its world turned to dust long ago, the shape it left behind continues to guide science forward. When the fossil was first studied in detail, paleontologists quickly realized that Carnotaurus was not simply a curiosity or an evolutionary oddity. It was a key, one that unlocked a larger story about a forgotten lineage of predators that once ruled the southern continents. Its anatomy, unlike anything found in the north, became a map pointing to a family tree that had gone mostly unseen. Through it, the abelisaurids, a group of fierce yet strangely built carnivorous dinosaurs, began to emerge from obscurity into clarity. Before Carnotaurus, abelisaurids were known only from scattered bones and incomplete remains found in places like Madagascar and India. They were puzzling fragments, often dismissed or misinterpreted, but when the near-complete skeleton of Carnotaurus was unearthed in Patagonia, everything changed. Its preserved form became a reference point, a Rosetta Stone of southern predation. Scientists could finally see the pattern that linked these scattered fossils together: the short skulls, the deep necks, the tiny forelimbs, and the strong, muscular legs. From this, a lineage took shape: the abelisaurids, a dynasty of hunters that had evolved separately from the great tyrannosaurs of the north. While those northern giants grew heavy and broad, their southern cousins followed a different path, one of refinement, speed, and specialization. The discovery of Carnotaurus redefined what it meant to be a predator in the age of dinosaurs. It showed that power could be expressed not only in mass, but in precision. Modern paleontologists now view Carnotaurus as the flagship of this entire southern evolution. Its features, once thought bizarre, are now understood as part of a broader ecological story, one shaped by isolation. When the ancient supercontinent of Gondwana began to split apart, its southern fragments drifted away from the rest of the world. Life on these continents, now known as South America, Africa, and Madagascar, began to evolve along its own path. The result was a collection of creatures that shared a common ancestry, yet each carried unique adaptations sculpted by its environment. In this context, Carnotaurus is more than an individual species. It is a portrait of evolution under constraint. It shows what happens when life is given the same challenges, hunger, heat, and survival, but must solve them without the same materials. Instead of copying the northern blueprint of predators like Tyrannosaurus, nature in the south built something new, a runner instead of a charger, a striker instead of a grappler, a creature that balanced its body not for raw power, but for perfect timing. Through advanced imaging, scientists have been able to study the fine structure of its bones in detail, learning how muscle and motion work together. Its hollow spaces within the skull and vertebrae show where tendons anchored and blood vessels flowed. Each discovery adds another line to the story of its biology. Its horns, once thought to be simple decoration, now speak of communication and rivalry. Its tail, dense with muscle attachments, reveals the secrets of its speed. Even its skin impressions, covered with bumps and ridges, tell of an animal built to endure heat and harshness. The ripple of understanding does not stop with Carnotaurus itself. Once scientists saw its form clearly, they began to recognize echoes of its design in other fossils. Abelisaurus, Majungasaurus, Rajasaurus all became connected through this revelation. Together, they painted a portrait of southern ecosystems that were just as rich and dynamic as the famous northern ones dominated by T. rex and its kin. In classrooms and research centers, Carnotaurus now stands as a reminder that evolution does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. The same pressures that shaped one world found different solutions in another, where the North built giants, the South crafted specialists, and in the bones of Carnotaurus, that difference shines through like a signature written by time itself. But its legacy extends beyond science. Artists, filmmakers, and storytellers continue to be inspired by its silhouette, the forward curving horns, the lean body, the strange proportions that seem to challenge what we expect a predator to look like. It reminds us that life's creativity is limitless, that beauty and power often take forms we do not anticipate. For paleontologists, however, its greatest contribution lies in what it taught about the process of discovery itself. Before Carnotaurus, much of southern paleontology was overshadowed by northern finds. The fossil fields of Patagonia were considered remote and secondary. Yet from that quiet corner of the earth came one of the most complete, most revealing fossils ever found. It showed that the story of life cannot be told from one hemisphere alone. The world must be read in full, every continent, every fragment, every grain of dust. And so, the horned predator lives on, not as a monster of the past, but as a messenger. Its bones, still displayed under soft museum light, are a bridge between hemispheres, between times, between the known and the still unknown. To study, it is to glimpse evolution as an artist at work, shaping diversity from solitude, turning isolation into innovation. Somewhere in its stone, there is a quiet lesson that even extinction cannot erase meaning. Carnotaurus left behind more than a skeleton. It left a legacy, a framework for understanding how life transforms, adapts, and begins again. The world that birthed it is gone, but the questions it raised continue to grow. In that way, its spirit endures, still running across the vast plains of scientific thought, swift and silent, leading us forward into the endless frontier of what life once was and what it might yet become. When the bones of Carnotaurus were first lifted from the soil, they carried the silence of 70 million years. But silence does not last long in the human imagination. In time, that stillness was replaced by the roar of cinema, by the flash of screens, by the image of a creature reborn not through science, but through story. Movies, documentaries, and games transformed Carnotaurus from fossil to myth. Its skull, with horns that once caught the light of ancient suns, was reimagined as a weapon of rage. Its lean frame, shaped by evolution for speed and precision, was turned into the body of a monster built for fear. The name meat-eating bull lent itself easily to fiction, and so the Carnotaurus of popular media became something far larger, louder, and darker than the animal that once walked beneath Cretaceous skies. In films, it often appears with skin like armor and eyes that burn with hunger. Its movements are exaggerated, its size inflated. It charges through jungles, breath steaming, its horns crashing against stone and steel. The music swells, and the ancient predator becomes a symbol of power and terror, an echo of humanity's fascination with being hunted by something older and greater than itself. Yet, the real Carnotaurus was nothing like the monster we imagine. It was not an unstoppable killer or a mindless beast. It was a living, breathing creature, shaped by the same quiet laws that sculpted every bird, every mammal, every leaf that grows today. It hunted because it had to. It moved with efficiency, not fury. It survived in a world that tested every form of life with drought, fire, and scarcity. Its strength was not in its aggression, but in its balance, a harmony of form and function that only evolution could write. The myths created by cinema are powerful because they speak to something deep within us. We fear what we cannot control. We marvel at what we cannot fully know. When we see Carnotaurus on screen, it becomes a reflection of those feelings, our awe at nature's creativity, our fear of its wildness. But science paints a subtler picture. The fossil tells us that its horns may have been used less for battle and more for ritual, for display, for silent contests of strength and posture. Its arms, though small, were not a flaw but a refinement, the mark of a creature that had traded grasping for speed. In truth, the real story is stranger and more beautiful than any fiction. The bones do not lie. They reveal an animal adapted perfectly to its world, light, swift, and resilient. Its skin, preserved in rare fossil impressions, shows rows of bumps and ridges, not the thick crocodile armor seen in films. It was not a dragon of myth, but a sculpted runner of the plains. Its eyes faced forward, giving it depth perception, perhaps even a keen awareness of movement. There was intelligence in that gaze, not cruelty. When we compare the movie image to the fossil reality, the contrast is profound. The cinematic Carnotaurus exists to entertain. The real one existed to endure. One was created in a studio, under bright lights and orchestral music. The other lived beneath volcanic skies, where storms swept across the land and heat shimmered on the horizon. It walked through the world quietly, never knowing it would one day be remembered not as a creature of earth, but as a monster of imagination. Yet there is a kind of poetry in that transformation. Humanity has always turned nature into story, painted on cave walls, carved in stone, whispered beside fires. The myth of Carnotaurus is part of that same tradition. It keeps the creature alive, though in a form distorted by our dreams and fears. And perhaps that is how memory works. It is never perfect. It changes, softens, exaggerates, but at its core, it keeps the spark of truth alive. For scientists, the task is not to erase the myth, but to guide it back toward wonder, to remind us that reality is not smaller than fiction, only quieter. The real Carnotaurus does not need to roar to command attention. Its story, told through stone and patience, is already astonishing. It is the story of a continent evolving in isolation, of survival through transformation, of a design so specialized that it has no equal in the fossil record. When paleontologists study its bones today, they do so with reverence, not fear. They see the creature as part of a long conversation between Earth and life, one that continues even now in the wings of birds and the stride of running animals. Carnotaurus was not the end of something, but a note in a greater melody that still plays across the planet. In the end, perhaps the most haunting thing about Carnotaurus is not its power, but its silence. The movies may give it a voice, but the fossil gives it meaning. It does not roar. It does not strike. It simply waits, its bones resting beneath glass, its story unfolding softly through light and dust. And when we stand before it, in that quiet space where imagination meets evidence, we begin to understand that truth and myth are not enemies. They are reflections, one vivid and loud, the other calm and enduring. Both remind us that life, in every form, is extraordinary. The real Carnotaurus does not need to be terrifying to be unforgettable. It already is. It carries within its bones the echo of time, the rhythm of survival, and the quiet power of being real. In nature, perfection is rarely permanent. What fits the world too precisely often fades when the world itself begins to change. The same claws, teeth, and sinews that grant survival in one age can become burdens in the next. Evolution is not a ladder, climbing ever upward, but a web, delicate, branching, full of beauty and uncertainty. Every creature that has ever lived is both a triumph and a risk. Carnotaurus, with its sleek frame and strange design, stood at the edge of that balance. It was the culmination of millions of years of refinement, an apex shaped by the sculpting hand of isolation and pressure. Its body had been perfected for speed, its horns for display and defense, its small arms for efficiency, its muscles for precision. Yet, in its very specialization lay a quiet fragility. The qualities that once made it powerful also made it vulnerable to a world that would not stay still. The world that Carnotaurus knew was one of extremes, heat, drought, and shifting lands. In that harsh environment, only the most finely tuned could thrive. Its long legs, narrow chest, and deep tail were perfect for bursts of motion across open plains. Its body conserved energy in the dry seasons, and its keen eyes could detect the faintest movement in the shimmering light. But when climates began to shift, when vegetation waned and prey grew scarce, its specialization became a constraint. Its speed meant nothing without something to chase. Its adaptations, once gifts, became limits. Scientists often speak of adaptation as the heart of life's endurance, yet adaptation is also compromise. To be specialized is to be dependent on the narrow slice of the world that allows that specialization to work. A cheetah's body cannot survive in deep forest. A whale cannot return to the land. And so it was with Carnotaurus. Its entire form was built for a rhythm that could not be easily rewritten. When the ecosystems of the late Cretaceous began to unravel, when the balance between predator and prey tilted, Carnotaurus could not change fast enough. Its lean form, built for bursts of speed in open terrain, could not serve it in a world growing unpredictable. And though it vanished long before the great asteroid struck, its story mirrors the quiet truth of all life, that adaptation is both survival and surrender. In its bones, we see not failure, but inevitability. Every creature that becomes highly specialized writes its own limit. Evolution rewards what works now, not what will endure later. The cheetah, the panda, the hummingbird, all carry this same silent tension. Perfection in one place, at one time, means dependence on that place, that time. When the stage changes, even the best performers must leave it. Yet there is beauty in that fragility. Carnotaurus is not remembered as a mistake of evolution, but as a masterpiece of design. Its speed, its balance, its elegance of motion, all were exquisite answers to the questions its world asked. And even though the questions changed, its answers remain preserved in stone. In that sense, its extinction is not an end, but a pause in the long conversation between life and earth. If one were to stand before its fossil now, the skeleton seems still, almost peaceful. The horns curve forward, the tail arches, and one can almost imagine the muscles that once pulled taut beneath its skin. It is not the image of tragedy, but of grace. Its existence reminds us that evolution is not about permanence. It is about participation, a brief, vital moment in a story far greater than any single species. In the quiet of its extinction lies the echo of its success. Carnotaurus lived exactly as it was meant to, perfectly suited to its time and place. For millions of years, it ruled its landscape, ran beneath a blazing sky, and carried the legacy of its ancestors forward. When the earth changed, it yielded that place to others, as all species eventually do. Its absence made way for what would come next, its bones becoming part of the soil that would nourish new life. We often imagine evolution as a steady climb toward complexity or intelligence, but nature moves in circles, not lines. Every adaptation carries the memory of both survival and loss. Every species, no matter how mighty, is temporary. The tree of life grows endlessly, but its branches are always falling away to make room for new ones. Carnotaurus, in its strange perfection, stands as a symbol of that eternal rhythm. It reminds us that beauty is not only in what endures, but also in what exists so precisely that it cannot last. Its speed, its narrow build, its horned head, all speak of a moment when nature dared to push design to its limit. And when that limit was reached, the creature did not fail. It simply stepped aside, its story absorbed into the greater one. Even now, millions of years later, the echoes of its adaptation linger. They live in the bones of its descendants, in the flight of birds that trace the sky it once walked, beneath, in the endless cycle of change that defines every living thing. Evolution is not about permanence, but about participation, a dance between creation and disappearance, between perfection and impermanence. And so, the horned predator remains, not in flesh or motion, but in memory. In the stillness of stone, it continues to teach us that to live perfectly within one moment is to risk being lost in the next, and yet, within that risk lies the quiet poetry of life itself. The world that once trembled beneath the steps of Carnotaurus is gone. The plains of Patagonia that echoed with its silent hunts have turned to stone, the rivers to dust, the air that filled its lungs to wind that whispers across an empty landscape. Yet somehow, even in stillness, the story of that swift predator continues to move. There is something hauntingly graceful about a creature built for motion, yet preserved forever in stillness. Carnotaurus was a body designed for speed, for bursts of life so powerful that even the air around it must have seemed to split. Its every muscle, every curve of bone, was made to chase, to strike, to move with the precision of survival. And yet, all that perfection, the narrow chest, the deep tail, the long legs that once carved paths through dust, now lies silent beneath layers of rock. Time, as always, is the greater hunter. When we look at the fossil, we see more than anatomy. We see the paradox of evolution itself, that the very traits which once defined mastery can become the reason for disappearance. Carnotaurus had perfected the art of motion, but its perfection was bound to a world that no longer exists. It had adapted to the rhythm of dry winds and scarce prey, to a landscape of brief opportunity and long stillness. When that rhythm faltered, it could not dance to a new one. The earth, meanwhile, was shifting beneath its feet. Volcanoes darkened the skies, seas crept across continents, and plants changed the air that every living thing breathed. The world was not ending all at once. It was slowing down. The cycles that once sustained creatures like Carnotaurus began to stumble, and in that hesitation, the swiftest fell first. There is an irony in that stillness, that evolution's fastest design was undone by forces it could never outrun. It did not die in pursuit or in battle, but in the long quiet that comes when the world changes too quickly for even the swift to follow. The very landscape that had sculpted its body into perfection became the sculptor of its end. Yet its story does not end in tragedy. There is too much grace in its design for that. The bones that remain are not the remains of failure, but of passage, a record of what movement once was, what life once demanded. When scientists study those bones, when they trace each groove, each connection, they are not resurrecting a monster. They are touching the trace of something that once lived at the edge of what was possible. In that sense, Carnotaurus never truly stopped running. Its speed became memory, its memory became knowledge, and knowledge, in the hands of those who study the earth, continues to move, shaping our understanding of how life evolves, endures, and transforms. The silence of its skeleton is not emptiness, but a kind of whisper. Its bones tell us that life is not about permanence, but about participation. Every species joins the earth for a time, leaves its mark in motion, then gives its place to another. Carnotaurus ran across its world with purpose, not knowing that each step carried it closer to stillness, and yet that is the story of all living things, movement toward an unseen horizon. If you close your eyes, you might almost hear it, the soft rhythm of footfalls on dry ground, the wind shifting through the heat, the faint hum of a world in motion. For a heartbeat, the landscape returns. The plains stretch wide, the sky glows with light, and in the distance, a shape moves with impossible grace. Horns catch the sun, muscles tighten beneath patterned skin. For that moment, the earth breathes again through a memory written in stone. When you open your eyes, the fossil remains unchanged. The motion has become a sculpture, frozen in the act of running, and yet, somehow, it still feels alive. Because what Carnotaurus left behind is more than bone, it is the echo of adaptation, the memory of balance between speed and silence. Every fossil, in its own way, teaches us something about the pace of existence. Some tell of endurance, others of change. Carnotaurus tells of precision, of how evolution can shape a creature so finely that it becomes both masterpiece and ending. Its speed was not wasted. It was the answer to a question the earth once asked: how fast can life move when time itself begins to fade? And when the question changed, the answer remained, carried forward in the fossil's shape, in the scientist's study, in the quiet awe of those who stand before it. So the story of Carnotaurus ends as softly as it began, with motion, with stillness, with the earth remembering. Its bones no longer move, yet they speak, of power, of silence, and of the speed with which life disappears. And in that silence, we are reminded that every creature, no matter how swift or slow, leaves behind a trace of its passage, a mark not of its ending, but of its belonging. For a time, Carnotaurus ruled the southern world. Now, it rests in the patience of stone. Yet in that rest lies the echo of its greatest truth, that life, even when still, never stops moving,